To the, what day is it? The March 4th meeting of the Ann Arbor City Council. If you're able, please rise and join us for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Would our clerk please call the roll of council?
Councilmember Hayner?
Here.
Councilmember Bannister?
Here.
Councilmember Griswold?
Here.
Councilmember Lum?
Here.
Councilmember Grand?
Here.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Here.
Mayor Taylor?
Here.
Councilmember Eaton?
Here.
Councilmember Nelson?
Here.
Councilmember Smith?
Here.
Councilmember Remlawi?
Here.
We have a quorum.
May I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda? Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, second by Councilmember Lum. Discussion of the agenda. Councilmember Remlawi.
Well, I'm not even sure if this is the time to do it, but I would like to pull something out of the consent agenda. I'm not sure.
Later.
We tend to do that at the consent agenda moment.
Okay. Sounds good.
I'll strive to remember.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion of the agenda? All in favor? All opposed? The agenda is approved. We have communications today from our city administrator.
Yes, Mayor, and thank you. I will keep my communications brief with respect to this evening's busy agenda. I do want to shout out to all the City of Ann Arbor staff who smashed all opposition in the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority's Conquer the Cold Challenge, as we came in first by a wide margin in the extra large or more than 500 employee category. The next step in our budget process is next week's meeting on March 11th. The topic is cost of service review and for water rates and water rate structures and alternatives analysis. Citizens Academy version 2.0 kicks off with its first session on Wednesday, March 6th. Slots for the Academy this year were filled from last year's waiting list, so we will soon recruit for next year's as well. A couple items on the agenda that I just offer some thoughts to council. Under the communications, item AC2 is a response to council resolution regarding next steps for the safety, pedestrian safety improvements at the Fuller Crosswalk. I believe council tabled that, so someone will have to take it off the table to bring it back at a future meeting. On item CA8, which is the Regional Solid Waste Authority, we received numerous questions from council, and due to the volume, the responses were not provided until later in the afternoon. One thing council may want to consider is deferring that to the second meeting in April and then dedicating the April 11th work session towards that topic. Acknowledging that that's something you want to do may save some time this evening. Finally, I'd like to welcome Fire Marshal Kay Summergill here to make sure that we don't exceed the occupancy for the room. And then also we have a split team. You know, baseball teams in the spring training have split crews, so we have a split crew. We have Sergeant Annie Vayners here, and one of the crews is Officer June Herr, who has Officer Charlie White, who is the protege under the Field Training Officer program. And then they actually have their eye appointment or hearing test later today. As you've noticed, the van out in the back parking lot, and they'll be relieved by Officer Eric Ronowitz and his protege, Alex Leathers. We thank you for your support.
We have no introductions this evening, so we come to public comment reserve time. Public comment reserve time are opportunities for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment reserve time, one needs to have signed up in advance by contacting our city clerk. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Our first speaker today is Tom Weeder.
Mr. Mayor, does this podium go down a little
bit? It
does.
There should be a button to your left.
Left or right? Yours pointing, looking at my right?
Oh, you're right. My apologies.
My right, your left.
I tried to put myself in your shoes, but I'm unable to do so.
Of course, in this city, we're all leftists, but anyways. Anyway, Last November, 26,746 Ann Arborites voted to establish a park and civic center commons on the library lot. For the first time, a specific use of city property is mandated in the city charter. On the agenda for your February 29th meeting was a resolution establishing a Center of the City task force. A member of the council asked the administrator about the source of funds for the proposed task force. In his council agenda responses, Mr. Lazarus stated that implementing the task force would likely reduce funds or delay a long list of popular city efforts: pedestrian safety and crosswalk improvements, North Main Street improvements, the Y lot, the tree line, traffic calming and pedestrian improvements, updating the master plan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I almost expected a statement that support for the task force would result in the orphaning of small children and killing puppies. How many Ann Arborites voted to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in planning for a train station of questionable value in Fuller Park? How many voted for spending hundreds of thousands in planning for the tree line, a project currently estimated to cost $55 million, a source of funds for which is, at present, more hope than reality? How about more than $100,000 for the Leaves sculpture on Stadium Boulevard, and more for art at South State and I-94? For hundreds of thousands to, quote-unquote, beautify the important suicide prevention fences on the upper floors of the parking structures. For $7 million to improve the intersection next to the farmer's market. For $2 million for sidewalk amenities on South U. How about borrowing nearly $6 million to repurchase the Y lot with almost no advance discussion and no plan for its use, taking a valuable property off the tax rolls and imposing financing costs on the city for years to come? How many voted for these things? 0. I get it. Some people at the council table don't like the idea of a commons on the library lot. Although there are fewer members of those members than there were before last November's election, probably not a coincidence. And some in the administration are similarly inclined. But the park or commons deserves serious support from city government, not to be treated like an unwanted stepchild. Communities across the country, from New York to Chicago to Birmingham, Plymouth, and Dexter, Michigan, have something that Ann Arbor lacks: central public open spaces which support a multitude of activities. A number of them are built over other infrastructure: rail yards, interstate highways, and yes, parking structures. It is time for the city government to try to make this project a reality instead of looking for excuses not to. Those 26,000 Ann Arborites are entitled to that effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Murray Rosenthal.
Green button?
We'll take care of that.
Okay.
No worries.
All right. Once upon a time, there were two houses of worship who decided to get together and share their common values in the same building. Temple Beth Emet and St. Clair's Episcopal Church started Genesis, which is located on Packard Road. It's been going for 45 years, since 1974. It's a great community resource. There are many organizations that use our building. Genesis is the entity which nurtures the relationship and maintains the building. My name is Murray Rosenthal. I'm currently president of the Genesis Board. I'm co-chair of the Green Team, and I'm on the Ann Arbor 2030 District Leadership Council. So tonight I'm going to be talking about saving energy. We have made several improvements to our building: LED lighting, HVAC improvements, and roof insulation, and new windows. The results: 2018, our gas usage was down 25% from the average of the previous 4 years, and electric down 3%, even though building usage increased a lot. So what I'm going to urge you to do tonight is to vote to maintain the funding of the 40-40-20 split. It's important. Ann Arbor has sponsored Clean Energy Coalition events, 2030 district events, and we're also supported in our efforts to green the building by Michigan Interfaith Power and Light and Solar Faithful. All of these entities help us to do that. So Right now, we're looking to install solar panels on 2 of our roofs on the Genesis building. That will serve to produce 25 to 35% of our total electricity. The input of organizations in the city of Ann Arbor is important. I have 3 boards and 1 vestry to convince to do this. So we're going to use investors from the congregation so that we can lease the solar panels from them and take advantage of some tax advantages. So this is important. The city of Ann Arbor supporting our efforts is of utmost importance to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Larry Unick.
Thank you for allowing me to come and speak to you this evening. I'm a proud resident of Ann Arbor for decades, living in Ward 3. I'm also a professor at U of M Medical School. I'm here to speak against proposed resolution 190395, which proposes to defund the city's existing climate commitment. I appeared before you in November to speak in favor of funding the Climate Action Plan. One of the reasons I emphasized at that time was the adverse health effects at present from burning fossil fuels. If health effects from air pollution are typical for America, they would include about 37 excess deaths per year in Ann Arbor from heart disease, stroke, lung disease, and other causes. If you think about important other actions that come before City Council, pedestrian safety, dangerous intersections, opioid abuse, you will have difficulty finding another action where so many lives are at stake. I also wish to mention the urgency of dealing with climate change. The International Panel for Climate Change report from October 2018 indicated that to hold human-caused global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade, we will have to have reduced greenhouse emissions by 50% by the year 2030. I also wish to provide 3 additional reasons to fully fund the city's climate action plan. 1, you have already approved funding for this plan in 2017. For some of you, the voters re-elected you based in part on your participation in approving that action. Number 2, it will be money well spent. Even without taking into account the cost of problems caused by greenhouse gas emissions, those externalities, such as the health problems I already mentioned, which are neglected in financial planning by just about everybody, the money spent to get us moving towards sustainable energy of the future, rather than relying on the dirty technologies from the 1800s and 1900s, will be a good investment in our cleaner future. Number 3, it fits with our image of Ann Arbor as a leader, not a laggard, in dealing with important problems where our efforts can make a big difference. Ideally, we should be joining the likes of cities such as Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Palo Alto, Boulder, Minneapolis, Toronto, Washington, D.C., New York, and Boston, all of which have timelines for being 80 or 100% free of greenhouse gas emissions, and many of which have actual plans for doing so. Also, we should be joining the university and working hand in hand with them as they plan their strategy for being carbon neutral by a date not yet specified. I strongly urge you to vote down Resolution 190395 and to proceed instead with full funding of the city's climate action plan.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ginny Rogers.
Hi. First, I just want to say thank you to all of you for your service. I recognize how challenging it can be to balance many different needs and viewpoints, so I thank you for that work. My name is Ginny Rogers, and I'm representing Citizens Climate Lobby. We have 40 to 50 active local volunteers deeply concerned about the urgent threat of climate change and working to enact federal legislation to tackle it. We have another 400 local supporters on our email list. I would like to express my opposition to Resolution 395. I think nullifying an earlier resolution stating intent to fund affordable housing, climate change, and pedestrian safety sends the wrong message. And I'm very concerned about relying on a survey to make decisions about spending millions of dollars. What if the survey results indicate that climate change and affordable housing are not top priorities? Does that mean that council will not feel obligated to treat them as urgent issues? Regardless of the outcome of this resolution, I urge you to dedicate reliable, sufficient funding for climate change in the upcoming budget. The city has hired a sustainability director who is an expert in her field. Dr. Stultz is dedicated, passionate, energetic, and eager to partner with anyone who is working on climate solutions. Could we please trust the expertise we are paying for and fund the items that Dr. Stultz recommends will achieve significant reductions in our emissions and make our city more resilient, healthy, and a better place to live? We can't prevent climate change, it's already here, but according to the IPCC, every bit of temperature increase we prevent will make a big difference in how bad it gets. No single type of action is enough, but all of them together will add up. I do this work even though it's uncomfortable because I am so worried about what the future holds for all of our children, especially those less fortunate. And I want to be able to tell my kids that I did everything I could. I hope you will think about what you will say to your children and all future generations, and especially those that don't have the wealth and privilege that we have here when you consider how important climate funding is. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Glenn Nelson.
I'm Glenn Nelson, along with Alice Carter, who is also here. We are co-chairs of Citizens for Mental Health and Public Safety. Thank you for this time. Alice and I have one simple request. Listen to citizens before you make a decision on the allocation of the funds from the mental health millage. And since we are all in a political setting, please make it obvious you are listening to citizens. The way to do this is to support the resolution on the mental health millage brought forward by Councilmember Lum. It is widely recognized and taught that constructive conflict resolution includes careful, respectful listening. As a corollary, one of the worst things a person can do in a conflict is to say to the other party, no matter what you say, I am not changing my behavior. The conflict then festers rather than has a chance for resolution. In the case of the allocation of the proceeds from the mental health millage, we urge you to clear the deck by passing the Lum resolution, and thus making it absolutely clear you want to listen to citizen input made possible by the survey before you make decisions. And then let's have a respectful dialogue where we discuss the merits of alternative allocations of the millage funds, including, but certainly not restricted to, the consideration of citizen views as reflected in the survey. This process offers the best hope for an outcome that will be widely accepted as an appropriate compromise. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Robert Gordon.
Hello, and thank you for having me today. I'm going to take a little bit different tack in arguing against the resolution that Jane Lum has sponsored, and that is we had a vote on this 18 months ago. The 40-40-20 split of the money was determined before that vote, and was one reason why I enthusiastically voted for this at that time. When we have passed with something like 73% of Ann Arbor supporting it, 67% of the county as a whole supporting it, to think that we could have a city council that was disappointed in the results of that election enough to try to overturn a vote of the people. It's just unbelievable to me. It really is. It's something that a third world country might do, that call, the Democratic Republic of Liberia or something like that, where a vote is taken and then it's ignored by leadership. Please think the kind of message and the kind of precedent this sort of situation will set for the city of Ann Arbor, where people cannot trust the votes they take to have effect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Richard Norton.
Good evening. My name is Dick Norton. I'm a resident of Ann Arbor in the Old West Side on 3rd Street. I'm a professor of urban planning and planning law at the University of Michigan, and I'm also a representative for the city of Ann Arbor to the Huron River Watershed Council. And in fact, I'm serving currently as the chair of the board of directors for that. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to serve. I'm here to ask that you not divert funding away from the Climate Change Action Plan via Resolution 395. I entirely understand the city's commitment to and desire to promote mental health concerns, but I ask that you not do that at the expense of the plans you've already laid out for climate change. And I want to make just a few points. Climate change is real. It's happening, and we're contributing to it through greenhouse gas emissions. And we need to adapt to the changes that are taking place, and we need to take meaningful measures to mitigate those effects. Coming at it from the watershed perspective, the primary concerns we need to worry about from climate change are increased flooding in this part of the world. And the cities like Ann Arbor and local governments are going to really feel that the hardest because of the impacts to our infrastructure that flooding will have and impacts to the river. Locals are really going to be hard hit. Ann Arbor is already doing pretty amazing things in terms of adaptations through the stormwater management program. In fact, I just looked today and found this really cool flyer on your program. You have really exceptional staff doing really cool things for stormwater management that really is good adaptation. You've already started down the road of taking really good, effective measures to start moving down the road of mitigation. And you have engaged really wonderful staff to help you along that course as well. So addressing climate change is coming about as an incremental problem. It's taken a while to get here. It's going to be incremental to come back and deal with it meaningfully. The City of Ann Arbor has already started to move in meaningful ways in that direction through these climate action plan proposals. You should continue taking those right steps. So please continue to dedicate the funding you committed to dedicating to those actions. Don't change your course of action and step away from those. And I recognize the difficult choices you have to make in terms of balancing these different needs, but promoting other things at the expense of this really important issue of climate change is not the way to go. For the sake of the watershed and for the community, please continue to support your climate action activities. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Trish Coleman.
Hi, my name is Trish Coleman, and I'm a longtime resident of Ann Arbor. I would like to invite anyone who is here who didn't get a chance to sign up to speak in a green shirt, who would like to support climate action, please stand. Thank you. So I am an environmental epidemiologist, and I conduct research and support student engagement in research at the University of Michigan. Much of my personal research examines the connection of human health and climate change via heat stress, air pollution, and other mechanisms. I'm also a member of the Climate Reality Leaders chapter of Washtenaw County. On February 26th, I organized and hosted a public health forum in which we had one of the key authors of the National Climate Assessment, Dr. John Balbus, come to Michigan to talk about this really important issue and the reason to act now. There's a video available of that. It's a lengthy discussion. Be happy to share that link with the council. A significant share of our emissions today will still be contributing to increased atmospheric concentrations of CO2 50 to 100 years from now. So the decisions we make now are extremely important, not only now, but to our future. Ann Arbor has not been moving fast enough to adequately address the climate crisis and the health implications because it hasn't provided sufficient funding until a first step in 2017 when the county rebate was designated towards climate action. The establishment of that fund is a very important action that the City of Ann Arbor has taken to address climate change, and we need to do more. Ann Arbor has the potential to be a statewide and national leader in addressing climate change at the city level, and we urge the City Council to fully fund its climate action work. Backsliding on climate action is not acceptable. Climate change is an important public health issue which will disproportionately affect vulnerable residents in our community. I urge the City Council to continue to fund climate action and to do more now. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is John Byers.
Hello, Mr. Mayor and City Council. Thank you for listening to me tonight. My name is John Byers. I live at 1102 Olivia Avenue. I am a senior at Washtenaw International High School and am one of the many kids here tonight who ask you to commit to using the millage rebate money to support affordable housing, climate action, and pedestrian and bicycle safety. I'm especially concerned about your willingness to support climate action. Can all of the kids who are here to ask City Council to fund climate action through the millage rebate please stand up? Thank you. We come from schools from every ward across the city, and we range in age from elementary school to high school, and we are going to have to deal with the damaged planet that you are leaving us. Can everyone else who's here to support climate funding also stand up? So, we are your constituents, and we are asking you to keep your commitment. Some of us will need to leave before the meeting because we have bedtimes, curfews, and homework. It's not because we don't care what you decide. So I'm 17 years old. In 2001, when I was born, the world emitted 23.35 gigatons of carbon. In 2018, global emissions reached 37.1. Last October, the UN panel on climate change said that we have 12 years to reduce emissions and avoid irreversible changes like losing coral reef and Arctic ice, and prevent terrible food shortages, fires, droughts, and the suffering that all these things are going to bring. 12 years. I don't understand why you're not doing absolutely everything you can to prevent this from happening right now. Ann Arbor is such a small city, and you are a local government, so these programs you're considering defunding, such as net zero affordable housing and the green rental program, they might not seem to matter in the big picture, but they do. Cities can test these programs, and other cities can adopt them. We have citizen support, and unless you're removing it, we have the funding. And I know that some of you don't want to have to do what the previous council said it wanted to do. I understand you want to make your own choices, but this seems an awful lot like President Trump withdrawing the U.S. from the Paris Agreement because he didn't want to make the commitment Obama made. Please don't do this. Government works because it makes commitments. Change happens when people work together over time, not by starting over every time somebody makes a new decision. So while you're contemplating keeping your commitment and waiting for the survey details, the Earth is still warming. Last year, emissions rose by 2.7%. There is not time to wait. We are asking you to be brave and lead because we elected you to be leaders. Fund affordable housing, pedestrian and bicycle safety, and climate action with the rebate. Keep your commitment.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ryan Hughes.
Hi. I want to make sure that we remain committed to funding affordable housing and climate action. And now several of the council members have already told us in other forums like why they might want to abandon that commitment. So let me address all the arguments that I've heard. I've heard that the voters might have been confused by the title of the millage, and so we need to spend all instead of only most of the money on mental health. Well, to that I'd say that one of the most effective mental health interventions that we can make is to give people access to affordable housing. And Avalon Housing, for example, does wonderful work to provide mental health services to all of its clients. So, affordable housing funding is mental health funding. I've heard the amount of affordable housing funding here will do nothing to provide affordable housing. Well, that's wrong. You know what amount will do nothing to provide affordable housing? Zero. That's what we're currently giving to the Affordable Housing Fund. And even if the supposedly very small amount of $800,000 a year, even the supposedly very small amount of $800,000 a year would go a lot further than that, because the Ann Arbor Housing Commission is able to leverage the amount, so they'd get like $25 of matching money for every dollar put in. And even if you think that 25 times $800,000 a year is just a drop in the bucket, well, you ain't never going to fill that bucket unless you put some drops in it. Now, I've heard that we have a survey out to find out if people want to spend the money, to find out how people want to spend the money. Well, that survey went out in the mail, and if you're housing insecure, maybe you didn't get that letter. So do the comfortably housed people of Ann Arbor think that affordable housing is a big priority? I sure hope so, but we might get a biased sample there. On climate action funding, I've heard that it would be better for each individual department to spend money on climate action. Okay, but how much in total? Like, are you suggesting spending the entire $800,000 a year on climate action, but just accounting for it differently when we're keeping the books? If it's that simple, that's one thing, but it will be harder to track our commitment if it's strewn throughout the books like that. But I've also heard the incompatible argument that the city wants to retain control of the budget and doesn't want its hands tied. Well, if the intent is to spend $800,000 a year on climate change, but just account for it differently, then it shouldn't be burdensome to ask for the commitment to spend the money if that's the way you already intended to spend it. Another argument I've heard is that the city shouldn't commit itself to spending that's not attached to a plan. Well, there's two plans. There's the climate action plan that was approved in 2012 and never funded, and there's the work plan submitted by the city's Office of Sustainability. But on the other hand, if we don't spend it on this, what are we going to spend it on? That's where there's no plan. I've heard that these problems are just too big and we should just give up. Well, that's not the opinion of our competent staff who work every day to do this work, even though it's hard. We need to support them.
Thank you. Are there communications today from council? Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. Just want to thank everyone who came out this evening. As a parent, it's incredibly meaningful to me to have such excellent role models for my kids to look up to in this community. So especially for all the of our younger members who came out today, still do your homework. We'll try to take care of things. Okay, so a few things. I want to spend most of the time talking about the ICPOC nomination process, and I apologize, this is a little longer than I usually spend in council communications. First, both Councilmember Ackerman and I attended a community engagement meeting at Pittsfield Elementary School last week, so I want to thank Community Engagement Officer Doug Martell, as well as those Forest neighborhood residents who came out to discuss the couple of really unfortunate events that happened in their neighborhood. My thoughts have been with this community since those events. They're incredibly close-knit, and one of the comforts I have is that this is a neighborhood where everyone really looks out for one another, and we saw that at this meeting. I believe that Dick Fortune, who was murdered, reflected the spirit of the Forest Brook neighborhood. While I only met him on a couple of occasions, I recall he had a positive personality. If you walked by his house, I can confirm he offered me flowers like he did to all of his neighbors, and always spoke of his neighbors and his neighborhood with great affection and kindness. So I'm so deeply sorry to this neighborhood for your loss, and to Dick's family and friends. It's not surprising after attending this meeting that the Forest Brook neighbors would seek more information about these events, including the SWAT event that happened a few days later. And while I completely understand why we don't share information about active police investigations with neighbors, just the want for information, the sub-ideal means that we have for communicating with residents really reinforce the work that I've been doing with my 3 fellow council members in nominating the ICPOC. We want the people who applied to this commission want to improve the relationship between the Ann Arbor Police Department and the community, and I know that with their work we can do better. Okay, so I'd like to review our nomination process, and sorry about that. Before I start with the nomination process, I want to address a recent concern that I've heard over the last week about the emails that were sent to those who were not selected. The reason that we sent emails to those who were not selected is really twofold. The first reason is that we just wanted to show our appreciation for those who applied. We could have filled this commission 3 times over with nominees. And so we grappled constantly with this desire to balance respect for our applicants and their privacy and respect for this desire for transparency. And so in sending this email, we wanted to thank them. This was not an easy application. It required a lot of thought, and there's so much commitment from this community. So we just wanted to show our appreciation. And we also wanted to prevent those who were not nominated from reading about it on MLive or from hearing about it in social media. We felt that we owed it to them for the work that they put forward to learn about it and to get a thanks directly from us and not hear about it through that means. The 4 of us understand that we are nominating. We are not determining who ultimately sits on the ICPOC. We're not trying to be dismissive of the authority of council. We just wanted to thank them for extending themselves, because we know that that wasn't easy. Okay, so back to the process, because there have been a lot of questions about it, and I want to be as clear as I can be. At our initial meetings, we were extremely careful to start at a place of identifying both our conscious and unconscious biases, understanding that this process would differ substantially from those nominating processes that have happened before. For example, applicants who had past negative interactions with police were considered more favorably. That might not be the case with other nomination processes. We were also careful to listen to feedback from a range of community members. We have a nominee in the front row who got a lot of feedback from the community in a positive way, and also hear from the Human Rights Commission, from the HRC, what their feedback was. Council members Ackerman, Lemomali, and I were incredibly fortunate to have 2 documents to guide our selection process. So there have been a lot of questions like, well, where is your, what were your criteria? Where's your matrix? We didn't have one. Instead, we used 2 guiding documents, and I'm going to review what those were, and hopefully you can understand why we didn't need to have an actual scoring system or matrix. So the first one is in the ordinance itself. Section 1214, which establishes the ICPOC, speaks to the composition of the commission. And subsection 3 of this section states the following regarding diversity of membership. The commission, community, organizations, and city council shall endeavor to ensure that A, the overall membership of the commission reflects the city's diverse population, including income level, race, ethnicity, age, gender, sexual orientation, and experience. B, segments of the community that are vulnerable and have been marginalized and that tend to have significant negative interactions with the police are amply represented. And C, the commission includes members with a variety of skills, expertise, and life experiences bearing on the work of the commission, such as people who work or have worked in the fields of mediation, conflict resolution, mental health, housing, homelessness, anti-racist and equity reform, and transformative justice, and people who have had significant experience with the police, law enforcement, and the criminal justice system. I can say 100% that guided our thinking in making the selection. And if you look at the members that we've selected, you can see that they hit upon those points. I'll touch on that in a minute. The application prepared by the Human Rights Commission was also essential to our decision-making. Applicants were asked to go beyond basic socio-demographic indicators, including an opportunity to examine the relevance of their personal identities to the work of the ICPOC. Applicants were also asked to provide their vision for the role of the ICPOC, relevant experience and skills, personal contributions to the Commission, and anticipated challenges, especially in the first year. The application questions provide further insight into the time that potential commissioners could dedicate to the work, their willingness to engage in difficult conversations, and their ability to work constructively on a team. So I can tell you all of those factors went into my decision-making as we went through these 62 qualified applicants. Okay. So to the nominees themselves. The nominees presented for council's consideration, which we'll vote on in a couple weeks, are unanimously and enthusiastically supported by all 4 council members on the nominating committee. All 11 are within the recommended list from the Human Rights Commission, with 6 of the nominees overlapping with the HRC's top 10. The nominees represent a range of ages and include 6 women and 5 men. 6 nominees identify as African American, while 2 identify as both Arab American and Muslim. Our nominees have worked for or served on boards of community organizations such as the Jim Toy Center, Ozone House, Avalon Housing, Peace Neighborhood Center, the Muslim Community Center of Ann Arbor, Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church, the Human Rights Youth Coalition, the Michigan Advocacy Program, the State Street Area Association, and Ypsilanti Community Schools. And that doesn't cover all of it. That just touches on a few. While the nominees have complementary skills and life experiences, they all share the common desire to engage in the challenging work to improve the Ann Arbor Police Department and make a positive impact on our community, every single one of them. So in the weeks ahead, I encourage my colleagues, if you have questions, please just ask us. Share them. I'm pleased to discuss the merits of individual nominees. I'm pleased to address any concerns about the process. But I expected to get pushback from the community. What I didn't expect was to have so much distrust amongst my colleagues about this process. So if you have questions, please just ask us. We all came at this with the best of intentions. We all want this to work, and we believe, I really just hope that, that we'll give these nominees a chance because they are excellent. I am proud of this group that we're putting forward, and I hope that they'll have your support in a couple weeks.
Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. I'll try to be a little bit brief. Appreciate Councilmember Grand's explanation of the process that we took, and I'm proud of the people that are being put forth, and really proud of the youth in this case, and this case here tonight. So I don't think I've gotten so many letters of recommendations before. Zainab, you're quite accomplished already. On to some official matters. As the city's representative to the LDFA, there's been some changes in the composition of the board. Ann Arbor was selected after 15 years of the first charter expired for the smart zones. So Ann Arbor, along with 2 other communities in the state of Michigan, was allowed to renew their charter. And in the process, there needed to be a reorganization of the board, and it called for membership to come from Washtenaw Community College and representation coming from the county. Washtenaw Community College has appointed somebody, and I believe the county is working on it this week. So by our next board meeting, which is March 19th, on the heels of a council meeting, 8:15 sharp, Tuesday morning, we should have the composition correct and according to the statute. And so I wanted to bring it to the attention of everyone here that the LDFA should be back running on all 8 cylinders here shortly. Secondly, I'd like to thank everyone who came out for my constituent hour this last Saturday. It was a smashing success, and I think over 15 people attend. And, there was a lot of concerns that were brought up here tonight. Affordable housing and climate action were two top issues, amongst a bunch of other things. So, I just wanted to say that I appreciate everyone coming out, and I felt engaged more by it all. So, thank you, and I look forward to the rest of the evening.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few upcoming events I'd like to mention of importance to folks, possibly. Number one, as usual, the first Tuesday of every month is a CARD meeting held at the Western Washtenaw County Service Center on Zeeb Road. CARD is a Dioxin watchdog group with the county. And the first 45 minutes are being held open to discuss our concerns about the recent discovery of dioxin in the Barton Pond intake and in our treated water system, finished water system. I'm quick to point out that, I'm sad that I can't say that we've never had dioxin on our water, because now we have. The levels that were detected with the excellent job that our water staff does are orders of magnitudes lower than the methods that DEQ even uses to monitor the plume itself at its core. And so these are very, very tiny amounts, but it is an indicator of a problem that we know has been growing for 35 years. And things are happening. We're pushing hard on this issue, and we're pushing hard for an improved cleanup. And I won't speak for anybody else on CARD, but in my opinion, when it shows up in our water intake, it's a violation of the prohibition zone, and I'm going to demand a cleanup. So secondly, so that's tomorrow. Secondly, on March 14th, this may be of interest to this crowd, is the 17th annual Wege Lecture on Sustainability at Hill Auditorium at 5 p.m. This one is No Victory Without Optimism, Advancing Climate Action in 2019 and Beyond. And the keynote speaker is Christiana Figueres, who is the architect of the Paris Accords. And so it's really great that the university brings these in. And I had the distinct pleasure of working on the site for the 8th lecture when the Dalai Lama came to speak on Earth Day reflections. That was fantastic also. So I urge people to sign up for that. That information can be found online. And lastly, some business owners in my ward who are concerned about sustainability issues and social justice issues have asked me to bring forward at some point, possibly after the budget cycle, a consideration of looking into the city of Ann Arbor becoming a fair trade town. There's a fair trade national conference in Chicago this prior weekend that they attended, and I don't know if you're familiar with the fair trade movement, but it encompasses social justice and sustainability issues, and Chelsea is a fair trade town. It's the only city in Michigan that is. Michigan State University is a fair trade university, along with Eastern University and Wayne State. And so it's an important program, and basically what it does is it takes a look at how money is spent, the procurement channels, and it encourages the community to coalesce around these issues of fair trade and social justice, worker rights, and things like that. And it just seems like a good idea, and so I'll be bringing that in the future. Hopefully our administrator will do his fine job of finding out what it entails, and we'll get that moving, because I think it's a good opportunity for us to come together as a community. Thank you.
Councilmember Bannister.
I just had a quick announcement. Wanted to thank the 40 or so people that came out last night for our first reviving of the council caucus. And I also want to, and there were 6 council members there, and as I said, about 40 people. And I really want to give a special thank you to Councilmember Griswold for thinking of it and getting it off the ground, getting it organized, bringing the cookies, making sure the door was open and the door was locked. So thank you so much, Kathy. And it was an excellent example of community engagement and good governance. We had people could come up and do a 3-minute public comment for as long as many people as wanted. So I just want to encourage everybody. Our next one is on Sunday night, March 17, from 7 to 9, and probably right back here in the council chambers.
Councilmember Smith.
Yep, Councilmember Hayner, thank you for the plug for the Wege lecture. You beat me to the punch on that one. Of particular interest to a lot of people here is the Global Climate Strike, Washtenaw County, March 15th. The students, join students and people across the county as we walk out to demand urgent action on climate change from policymakers, all level of governments. Begins at 11:11, meet on the Diag. It's Friday, March 15th. Hope to see you there. Also, Friday morning, March 15th, I will be having constituent open hours at Mighty Good Coffee, 9 a.m.
Councilmember Lum.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd also like to thank everyone for coming out, even though the vast majority of you spoke against this resolution that I'm bringing forward. We also got well in excess, I'd say, of 100 or so emails from many folks. I know the Ecology Center, the Sierra Club, Washtenaw Biking and Walking Coalition sent out mass emails to all their members, and that generated a lot of emails from folks. And as you'll hear later, I mean, this is all about, and if you read the resolution, getting community input on this resolution on the obviously the county mental health and public safety millage. I would also like to just comment briefly on AC2, which is the administrator's response to the council resolution on relocating the Fuller Road crosswalk at Huron High School. First, Mr. Lazarus, thank you for the response. Council had asked staff to look at potential alternatives for relocating the crosswalk and what could be done to improve pedestrian safety at the existing crosswalk. The response identifies 2 improvement alternatives at the existing crosswalk in addition to relocating the crosswalk. And of the 2 improvement alternatives for the existing crosswalk, option 2 is the most viable alternative. It includes a pedestrian refuge island, which had been recommended initially by the A2 Safe Transport folks. Staff continues to recommend relocating the crosswalk about 400 feet down Fuller from the Gallup Park entrance where it exists today. I have several questions, follow-up questions, but now's not the time for that, obviously. What I would suggest and request, however, is that you schedule a public information meeting at Huron High School so that the Huron parents and other interested residents can review and comment on the alternatives. It would be helpful, too, if staff reviewed the alternatives and the pros and cons at the next Ann Arbor Public Schools City Transportation Safety Committee meeting. And I appreciate that Councilmember Griswold was appointed as our liaison to that committee. So thanks, and thanks again for the response to that. And thanks.
Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's a meeting coming up on March 13th that I think would be of interest to Fourth Ward residents and anybody who is driving through our neighborhoods. The intersections of 7th Street and Scioto Church Road and the intersection of 7th Street and Stadium Boulevard. The city staff will be available on Wednesday, March 13th to discuss those changes from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. at Dicken Elementary School in the multi-purpose room. And the only other remarks I'd like to make is I asked some questions of the agenda regarding the Independent Community Police Oversight Commission, and the responses that I got was that they were matters for council to discuss among its members, and I continue to hope for more public discussion at this table around how choices were made, whether or not there were rubrics. One thing I'm looking forward to discussing at some point, perhaps 2 weeks from now, so that the community can be part of the audience of understanding about it, where these choices overlap with HRC recommendations. So I look forward to conversation that we can have at this table for the benefit of the community to understand our processes 2 weeks from now, I guess. Thank you.
Councilmember Griswold.
If I were to say our planet is dying, that may seem like an overstatement. But 20 years ago, I visited the coral reefs east of Belize, and I've seen photos of what those same coral reefs look like today, and there are definitely changes. So the real issue is how fast is the planet going to die, and can we intervene? It is critical, and it's unfortunately unfortunate that we wasted so much time on these little minor discussions today, when what we need to do is be solution-oriented. We need an honest discussion with measurable goals. And it angers me. I want to thank everyone that came, but let's start talking to each other and let's focus on the solution. Okay, I'll take a breath and then mention 3 resolutions that I have planned. First one is to petition the U.S. EPA for a full preliminary assessment of the Gelman-Dahmer 1,4-dioxin groundwater contamination. A constituent asked me to look into this, and I will be attending the CARD meeting tomorrow. And if there is support, bringing it back to council. Number 2, a resolution in support of a bill that's being introduced by Representative Ronnie Peterson to amend the Michigan Vehicle Code to be similar to the Oregon state law for unsignalized crosswalks and other edits recommended by MDOT. Finally, a resolution to hire an independent professional with executive employment expertise to advise council going forward on the evaluation process and goal-setting process for the city administrator and city attorney. Thank you.
Councilmember Lum for a
Thanks. Just,
reprise.
yeah, when I said thank you at the end, what I meant is, I really meant to thank my colleague, Councilmember Grand, for walking everyone through the process and the challenges that, they were nice challenges. We had 62 wonderful applicants for the ICPOC committee, and again, these were, we are posting these nominations now for council consideration, and Councilmember Nelson and anyone who has questions of us, we encourage you to not be shy about asking us, you know, your questions, sharing your concerns. And I saw your question about a rubric, and I think Councilmember Grand, she pretty eloquently explained that there wasn't a, you know, rubric, but that we were guided by, in reading all of the applications, and the applications did require, you know, thoughtful submissions, which again, you know, made our job that much more challenging, our assignment, but it was a nice assignment. We were all honored to participate. Our colleagues, I can speak for my colleagues, everyone gave this incredible, you know, thought and diligence, and we, you know, we really collaborated very nicely. It was really a positive experience, I have to say, and we consensed, obviously, around we're really excited about this group that we're bringing forward. But again, which is not to say if you have questions, concerns, to not reach out to us. And this goes for the public as well, obviously. So, and council will be voting on this at the next meeting. But in the meantime, yeah, don't be shy. So thank you, Councilmember Grand. You obviously gave that a lot of thought to lay this all out, because there have been a lot of questions about it, and we're all just trying to do the best job that we possibly could. And I was very impressed with the thought, time, and effort that was put into this undertaking by my colleagues. So thank you all.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe this is 10 out of 11 council members communicating in council communication. No pressure, Mr. Mayor. You're the only one
Well, we
left.
haven't had Councilmember Eaton yet, but
I'm sorry.
I wait with bated breath.
Never to overlook Councilmember Eaton. I want to thank the work of the subcommittee responsible for putting forward nominations to the Independent Community Police Oversight Commission, the ICPOC. When you have 62 incredibly qualified individuals, incredibly passionate individuals put forward applications, put forward their names, it's a difficult task in a lot of regards, and it's an easy task in a lot of regards. And I'm really proud of the group that we're putting forward, not only by the socio-demographic, you know, overview that Councilmember Grand gave, but truly just the richness of their applications and the passion that they have for this work. And to push forward productive results. My heart also goes out to Dick Fortune's family and neighbors. It was a hard public meeting to attend, this is a tight-knit community, and a murder in Ann Arbor sends ripples through the community, but it really reverberates in the neighborhood and on a block. And I'm grateful for the police department for being there to answer questions that they could, although I understand residents were disappointed in what state law and policies prevent us from sharing. Or I should say the police department from sharing. But it also made me very optimistic for the work of this commission, because the questions that community members had, I think, will be incredibly served by the work of this body, and the questions that they had, or the answers to the questions, well facilitated by the body. So I'm excited for that. I'm excited to be a liaison along with Councilmember Lum onto this new commission. And then finally, my last point. I'll be bringing forward 3 resolutions at our next meeting, the March 18th meeting around affordable housing. The first will have to do with downtown premiums, how we incentivize developers in our downtown districts, trying to create more opportunities for how affordable housing be built downtown. And if affordable housing isn't built downtown, more opportunities to get payments into the Affordable Housing Fund, a fund that hangs at a functional balance of $0. The second will revolve around 721 North Main, a publicly owned piece of property, and the final around 2000 South Industrial, another publicly owned piece of land. So I look forward to putting those forward. They're in their final reviews in the attorney's office, and I'll make them public just as soon as I can. But if affordable housing is something you're of interest in, I would love to see your face again on March 18th, Monday, this chamber, 7 p.m. Thanks so much.
Councilmember Eden.
Thank you. I want to thank Councilmember Nelson for announcing the workshop regarding the 2 intersections on South 7th. But I also want to point out that there is an online survey. If you have strong opinions about the changes that have been made to those 2 intersections, I encourage you to search our webpage for Scioto Church, and that will pop up. And I encourage residents who have strong opinions about the changes at those intersections to take the survey. Thank you.
Further communication from council. I would like to recommend the following nominations for your consideration: to the Cable Communications Commission, Carol Dunitz; to the Housing Commission, Samuel Bagenstos; to the Board of Review, Panel 1, alternate Ann Harlow. May I have a motion, please? Moved by Councilor Ackerman, second by Councilmember Griswold. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? They are approved. My apologies. I'm bringing these forward for consideration at our next meeting. I thought that I brought these forward earlier. It has been...
Well...
So...
They're excellent candidates.
They're excellent candidates. Let's withdraw that vote with your collective acquiescence. I'll consider it withdrawn. Thank you very much. My apologies for jumping the gun on that. Sigh. We now come to the consent agenda. May I have a motion, please, to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, second by Councilmember Lum. Discussion of the consent agenda. Councilmember Romlawi.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. I'd like to pull CA 8 off, if I could.
Let's put CA 8 immediately after the consent agenda. Further discussion of the consent agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The consent agenda is approved with 11 council members present, all voting in the affirmative, thus satisfying the 8-vote requirement with respect to CA 4, CA 5, that is all. CA 8, resolution to approve execution of articles of incorporation for and becoming constituent member of the Washtenaw Regional Resource Management Authority. Moved by Councilmember Lum, second by Councilmember Grand. Discussion, please, of CA 8. Councilmember Romlawi.
Well, the city administrator alluded to this earlier in their meeting. I just believe that this should probably be postponed for some time until we get the results of our survey on our waste and recyclables and compost costs, service and such. And I just don't think this is the right time to be introducing more discussion in an uncertain, environment right now. And this is just not the time to take this task on. And I would like to see this come late to us later.
Councilmember Mr. Lazarus has requested the second meeting of April. Is that good by you?
I think I read in a response that the results of the study come in July. I really think we paid a lot of money and time, and so I'm not sure. I think it's a little premature, maybe.
I've gotten hands and Councilman, and Mr. Lazarus, point of information, then I'll have one or two. Mr. Lazarus.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember Ramlawi. The response to the questions also indicated that there's a little bit of interdependency between the Solid Waste Resource Management Plan and a council decision on the Regional Waste Authority, and that one informs the other. Many council members have asked for a discussion of the authority. I don't know that that needs to wait until later. If we repurpose the April 11th work session, we can have the discussion. That'll give you time to review the rather large volume of responses to questions, and then at that time, council can decide whether to take it up at the next meeting or they can defer it later. But it does inform the outcomes of the resource management plan, and that's why I would ask that you consider it at that point.
All right, we'll ask for more time. I don't think that's enough time. I'm sorry, I don't have my mic on, but yeah, I think April is still early, and I think we got to wrap our heads around a lot of other things. So I think it's still too soon, but that's just one council member's opinion.
Councilor Lum, then Hayner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I mentioned when this was brought up at our budget work session last week, I believe any action at this point to establish a solid waste authority is very, very premature, and that I would be moving to table this action. And we're made aware of that also in some email exchanges that we had prior to tonight. So that's what I'll be moving in a minute, and here's why. As we speak, the city is conducting a complete reassessment of solid waste, recycling, and composting operations. We're paying a consultant $250,000 to lead the study, and its purpose and scope are quite comprehensive. As noted in the cover letter, memo, when the consulting contract was approved last April, the purpose is to, quote, lay out a strategic approach for the city on how best to provide solid waste, recycling, and compost organics management programs, end quote. The memo also stated that, quote, this will be more than a solid waste plan update. It will serve as a business plan to guide solid waste operations for the next 5 years and beyond, end quote. Anyway, that study isn't completed yet. It's expected to be done in July. And without the benefit of the report, its recommendations and rationale, let alone any council or community discussion about it, and also at the budget work session, when I asked about this, Mr. Hupy, the Public Services Administrator, indicated that once we got this consultant's report in July, that would be followed up with a few months of community conversation. So we haven't had that discussion yet. But before all of that, we're being asked to create and join a regional solid waste authority. This is a really important decision we'll be making, and essentially, we're assuming an answer before we even have the report, the recommendation, and discussion. That makes 0 sense. It's not just the cart before the horse, it's the cart before the horse is even born. Last week, city staff indicated the solid waste budget for fiscal year 20 is essentially a carryover budget. I asked about that too, because the consultant's report isn't coming until July, and there will be, again, a good bit of discussion time necessary, this is from staff, after that on how operations should be structured. That makes sense. Voting tonight on creating and joining an authority doesn't make sense. The administrator suggested to me that perhaps you could postpone this tonight, as he did tonight, and have a council work session on an authority in April and vote on it at the council meeting following that. I appreciate the administrator reaching out and acknowledging the need for a work session and public discussion on the matter, but in my view, the timing that the city administrator is suggesting misses the point. The point is that we're paying $250,000 for a comprehensive review of solid waste, recycling, and composting operations, and we shouldn't be making any decisions until the report is completed and fully digested and discussed by both the council and the community. It may turn out that creating a real regional solid waste authority does make sense, and it is in Ann Arbor's best interest, but we clearly don't know that now, and we won't know it for several months. And I will say that if council does decide to join an authority, the draft articles of incorporation we were provided tonight need a good bit of work before I would be comfortable with them, especially in the area of representation and governance. The City of Ann Arbor will be the largest player in the authority, yet our representation and voting power would be no different than any other participant. Dexter, for example. They would have the same representation. But as I said, any specific discussion on the Articles of Incorporation or discussion on the forming or joining an authority at all is very premature. So I move to table CA8. I'm moving to table rather than to postpone the item, as it will be several months before we're at the point where this conversation is appropriate. I don't know when that will be, summer, fall, or when, and I don't think anyone, staff or my fellow council members, knows when that will be either. For that reason, I'm moving to table rather than postpone the item to a time certain. Thank you.
Seconded by
I would second that.
Councilor Ackerman. Councilor Lum, you still have the floor.
I'm done. It was just seconded.
All right, let's redo the, I have Hayner and Eaton on the queue. Do you want to speak to the tabling?
Only in as much as I would support that for the reasons that are thoroughly illuminated by Councilwoman Lum.
Councilor Eaton.
She really didn't leave us anything to say, so I thank
Well,
Councilmember Lum for exploring the entire subject.
Further discussion, Councilor Hayner for.
I mean,
Sure.
I didn't know the table was coming right away. Yeah, I mean, my concerns, I think I expressed in my council questions, but I understand that there's interdependency between the solid waste management plan, master plan that we contracted out for, and this Washtenaw County, or the Greater Washtenaw County, or Eastern Washtenaw County Regional Resource Management Authority. And so in what way is it, perhaps the administrator could answer this question for us, in what way is it that we couldn't ask the consultant to say, if we're in, if we're out, and give us a two-forked look at what we're looking at here? I also share Councilmember Lum's concerns about the contract itself, of course, and it would all be too much to vote on tonight, and it all would be premature, as she said. So, could you? Is it possible that we ask the consultant to consider an in and an out and looking at this research? I mean, my understanding is that they are well aware of its existence and more aware than most of us at this table. Would you, is that something we can consider asking?
I'm going to ask Mr. Slotin to come up and answer the question, since he's been the lead on the resource management plan.
To respond to Councilmember Hayner's question, that could be something asked, because that would be something outside of the scope of the contract. So, because right now the contract is built around taking into consideration whether the city decides to be in the authority or not. So if the decision is to not become part of the authority or to hold off on that, then within the scope of the contract, we'll continue down the path with the items that we know, the costs that we have. We could look at that down the road, but to examine it closely and comparatively with the cost, that would be something we could approach them on, but we'd have to see what would that cost and take to do that.
If I could add a couple of comments to that, then. You know, we started down the path of looking at a regional authority because we recognized that we didn't have enough material to support a material recovery facility on our own. Plus, one of the benefits that we would get out of a cooperative agreement is to get some standards for what goes into different recycle flows, because more and more contamination becomes an issue, raises the residuals that you have as you process the materials. The reason for doing it through Mr. Pratt was, quite frankly, we didn't want to see this as being something driven solely by Ann Arbor to impose our will on our partners around the county. The reason for the structure, therefore, is everyone pays the same admission fee, therefore they have equal representation at the table. The business planning for what a local resource recovery facility would look like depends on management, on ownership, and on the participation of it. And that's part of opening it up to a regional approach as well. It also serves to mitigate the city's sole risk. The reason for asking to bring this back on April 11th is I don't know that there's any harm in the schedule in doing that. We have some time set aside to have an open discussion about it. It can still be timely, and council can make up its mind at that point as to whether to agree to join, to defer, or as Ms. Lum says, to table it. I think that makes good sense, given that we have to make a decision one way or the other on the direction we want to go from a business planning perspective. So we can also have Mr. Pratt and Mr. Davis, the attorney who drafted this, also walk through it in a period where we're really not under the gun from a session time standpoint as well. And it could lead to a healthy discussion, not only about the regional authority, but also where we are on the resource management plan, while there may be still some time to make some adjustments. The process has been difficult. There are a lot of moving parts to it. And as we get to the end, we'd like to nail as many of those down, eliminate some of the degrees of freedom in the problem. And one of those is a discussion and decision on whether the business plan for us going forward includes a regional approach or not.
I think if Councilor Hayner, you still have the floor. Councilor Reeton. Oh, I'm distracted. Further discussion of the tabling. Councilor Bromley.
I'll be supporting Councilmember Lum's efforts in getting this tabled. I think we need to get our own house in order first before we reach out and start doing something more complicated. Our solid waste is in disarray, and I don't think a month is going to give us enough time to figure things out and to go into a business with other partners that soon. We've paid a lot of money for this study. In fact, and I'm not sure if if members of the Environmental Commission want to speak on this. It's being brought and sponsored by them as well. They want to weigh in on it, but we asked a couple questions last night, and it's not sure that the Environmental Commission is up to speed on this either.
Councilmember Smith.
So I appreciate Councilmember Lum's motion to table this, and I agree with many of her points, but I'm not going to support it because I think that we are long past due a work session on this topic. If this is the mechanism to get us to that work session, and that's in April, I would like to have that. I would like to have this discussion in the context of a broader, or is it April? I'm sorry. I would like to have this discussion of the regional authority in the context of, what's happening with the MRF, what is the business plan potentially for the MRF going forward. I'm hoping that we are to a point where we can have a little bit of guidance from the draft solid waste plan. I think that that's an appropriate time frame, but I think it's well past due to have this work session.
Councilor Lum.
Thanks. I would just say that, we can have a work session anytime. And honestly, I don't understand what the rush is, with all due respect. And I think any discussion about a regional authority and our joining one would make more sense to have after we get the consultant's report and recommendations in July on the city's solid waste plan. And these other communities don't even know what we would be bringing to the table in the absence of a plan. I really do think we need to get our own house in order first. And so I'm on the admin committee, and the admin, we can, again, you know, we can schedule a work session anytime, but it just seems the timing of that conversation, it would be more, I don't know, logical, I think, to have it in, once we are somewhat informed about the consultant's recommendations for the city's solid waste plan.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I was actually going to suggest the same, so I appreciate Councilmember Lum brokering that. Yep, I'm still seconding.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you. I should have asked the semi-council questions about this matter, but I didn't. And so would Mr. Pratt consider answering a quick question?
Mr. Pratt among us?
Since I saw him out there?
Behind the computer screen.
Yep.
Thanks.
Good evening, members of council, mayor, members of the public.
Thank you. I got a kind of impromptu debriefing about this from you after a CARD meeting a couple months ago, and so I had a sense of what was going on, but my question is there a hazard to the formation of the Eastern Regional Authority if the city doesn't join in a certain amount of time? Is there a clock running for any reason?
I wouldn't say there's a clock running. One thing you might wish to consider is there are now 4 communities who have joined the authority as of this evening. Saline has also joined, along with Pittsfield Township, Dexter, and so they're probably going to have their first meeting in May, and you might wish to consider that along with the authority to have, you know, voting power and so forth. Your current situation is you have 100% of the authority or control of how you handle your solid waste and 100% of the costs associated with that. And, you know, with no disrespect to your consultant, there are a limited number of things they're going to recommend to you. And from our conversations with your neighbors and your representatives over the past couple of years, dating back to February of 17, there's a lot of common problems and issues. So odds are your study is probably going to make some recommendations that other folks are interested in. They may be still interested in those things if the city is kind of coming along later on. I can't speak for those other entities. The county would not be a part of one of those things.
I have a question for.
Thank you. That was my question, was a timing matter. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks. I have while you're there, I have a question, Mr. Pratt, thanks. So you said that the consultant will be bringing us a limited number of recommendations. Have you, I mean, none of us have, we approved, you know, spending $250,000 on this consultant study, and we've received no updates, no information, nothing. But it sounds like you're aware of what is going to be brought forward?
No, I'm so sorry. I have no information on the details of it, but you've got trash, you've got recycling, you've got compost. How many different things can you do with those? How many different outcomes are possible from that study? And I'm just pointing out that your neighbors have experienced many of the same problems you all have had. Difficulty in getting processing, hauling costs going up, there were gas prices in the past, and around the state this is the most densely populated part of the state that does not have some type of intergovernmental solid waste coordination, and no group that's ever formed has ever disbanded. So it's not really like, hey, let's do it because everybody else is. It's one of those situations where once people have started working together, they've recognized there's benefits. And, you know, that's all I can generally say about it. But there's not that many ways that other folks are going to handle their material than whatever your recommendations are.
Okay,
you know?
to that I would just say then, given your assessment of, you know, the what-ifs and the possibilities, and given what they were asked to go off and study, then many in the community, myself included, that begs the question, maybe we shouldn't have spent $250,000 to retain a consultant to come up with a Ben-Hur of a study on this. I will also say that the city used to have a solid waste commission. I served on that solid waste commission years ago. That solid waste commission, we had many citizen committees. Those citizen committees, we never hired a consultant to come up with our updates of our 5-year solid waste plans. We had, you know, we're Ann Arbor, we're fortunate. We had lots of value add at the table and serving on these subcommittees. It represented lots of stakeholders, and over a period of a year, the Solid Waste Commission would come up with recommendations, and, I'm talking about a solid waste plan that's, a couple inches thick and had a lot of meat on the bones. And anyway, the Citizens Committee did all that work, and it wasn't, it was a major effort. And so here we are now paying, $250,000 for a consultant study, and it better have meat on the bones, and it better not just be some, I don't know, not a, that doesn't represent due diligence and a lot of study on their part and a lot for us to digest, because that is, that's a significant taxpayer investment to go off and come up with a solid waste plan. So I'm just disappointed at the takeaway that you're giving us about what we're going to get back in return for this investment.
I'm sorry, I can't speak to what you'll get back. I just mean in general, the goals, the how you're going to do it, how you're going to pay for it. I think that's the expertise you're paying for. It does get complicated when you try to chase the money around that is sprinkled all over.
Mr. Lazarus, do you care to?
So maybe I can help clarify. The scope of services that council approved was very clearly laid out when council adopted the contract. The process has included a rather robust stakeholder group and several discussions with the Environmental Commission. The plan also includes a good detailed financial analysis, which is reflective of the change in the solid waste market and the market for recyclables. I would also just want to make sure that, I want to state that our solid waste operations are not in disarray. Our solid waste operations received an 87% approval rating in the National Citizen Survey. We have very few missed pickups at all. Our concern remains on the fate of materials after they are picked up and they arrive either at the transfer station or at the MRF, which is being operated on a limited basis right now. It's been a long road since we shut the facility down for safety reasons, but the market's changed, the world's changed, the commodity pricing is different. Part of the benefit, in addition to standardization of what's recyclable, is that a regional authority gives us the opportunity to join with others to get the best available pricing. And while, not to contradict Mr. Pratt, we always have control, council always has control over what it does with our waste materials. The authority document doesn't require us to do anything. We can still have the ability to shape how we collect, how we sort, how we transport, and how we make sure materials are recovered and reused. But there are benefits to being the regional leader, to working with our partners, to using the volume we bring to the equation to help shape a more sustainable lifestyle for the entire Washtenaw community, and to work collaboratively towards that end. So I just want to get those points out. I still believe that having a discussion while we still have the consultant working on the finalization of the plan is beneficial to that process. I appreciate the opportunity to make those points.
Councilmember Eaton, and then perhaps we can move to a vote on tabling. Councilmember Eaton.
Thank you for making yourself available to answer questions. I just have a simple question. This form of authority is created under a state statute, and it's my understanding that the county as an entity and the University of Michigan and Eastern Michigan University are not eligible to join that authority. Is that correct?
That is correct, although both of those universities you mentioned expressed interest in staying abreast of things. They attended meetings early to talk about mutual problems, and they indicated that, there might be a time in the future where they'd consider being a customer if it made sense to them.
But they're not eligible to actually join.
But they would not be eligible to join the authority.
And so, as far as the tabling, I think that tabling is a better idea because it takes the uncertainty into consideration. We don't know when it will be timely to discuss this the next time, whereas if we postpone, it would have to be to a date certain. So I'm going to support the tabling of this matter. Thank you.
Further discussion of the tabling, Councilmember Graham, then Bannister.
I guess I'm just going to speak to just a couple points of the actual resolution at hand. I will support the tabling, but I do, something that I feel has gotten lost is that this council has often asked staff to come up with regional solutions as a way to save resources, money, do things more efficiently, expand the services that we can provide to our residents. So I just don't want that to get lost in the conversation, that we have often asked for regional solutions, and so it shouldn't be shocking to us as a council when staff comes back with a regional solution. And the regional solution has often been an ask around issues of solid waste. So, I support the tabling because I think there are a lot of unanswered questions. I also, on one level, support the idea of regionalization. And I know there have been major concerns about labor issues, and I also support, as I did before, and as this council did, the idea that as a council, we do not support non-union labor for solid waste. And so if there would be one thing that would make us pull out of such an agreement, it would be partnering with communities who didn't share that value. So just wanted to lay that out there since it looks like it might be a little while before we come back to this. Thanks.
Further discussion? Councilmember Bannister, sorry.
Yes, I just wanted to piggyback on Councilman Grand's comment. I had asked in agenda questions, and I don't see them in the agenda responses because we had specifically passed a resolution 18-2058 saying that we wouldn't subcontract out non-union work. And I was just wondering if that is in a major conflict with this new resolution.
Mr. Lazarus?
Councilmember, it is not. What council passed, I guess about a year ago, was a prohibition on us using temporary labor to do collection, and it said that we wouldn't contract out for services that are currently performed by in-house labor, and we have stuck to that. It also said that we should not direct the consultant to look at contracting services that would replace union labor, and we haven't done that either. It's a little bit more complicated than that because there's no one service area that is only in-house or only external, and part of going through the plan is to try and clear that up so that we can provide, continue to provide an exceptional workplace for our union labor, to optimize their ability to provide services, to provide a good career path for them as well. But I don't want to overstate what that resolution from council said, and the fact is that we have complied with it.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? No. Oh, I'm sorry, do you want? My apologies. It is tabled. Public hearing number one. Public hearings. We now come to one public hearing. Public hearings are opportunities for members of the public to speak to council and the community about a specific item on the agenda. To speak at this public hearing, your speech must relate to the item on the agenda, the subject of the public hearing. Speakers need not have signed up in advance. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Public hearing number one, an ordinance to amend Chapter 8, Organization of Boards and Commissions, Section 1210, Title 1 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor, to allow council to waive employment restriction. Is there anyone who'd like to speak at this public hearing? Please come right on up.
Hello. This amendment does not apply to anyone on the proposed list of members, of commission members. There is, however, a secret list of alternates, according to Councilmember Ramlawi. This is only triggered when the alternate list is only triggered when one of the proposed commission members is removed by council vote. So who's on the alternate list? If this amendment is a way to backdoor in Chuck Warbachowski or somebody with close ties to law enforcement, that's shameful. Furthermore, Councilmember Grand suggesting that we just ask about the process for determining the commission appointments is baffling, seeing as this body hasn't answered the public's concerns at any point of the process and have lied about basic points. So we're not going to trust you, And this amendment only adds to that distrust. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. We have before us the regular session meeting minutes of February 19, 2019. May I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes? Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, second by Councilmember Lum. Discussion of the minutes. Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I almost feel a little goofy because Councilman Smith just showed us how you're supposed to say nay when everybody else says yay by having your microphone on. And I did that a couple times in the last couple months where I've been a sole dissenting voice. And so I sent this to the clerk, and on C2, I'd like to modify C2 to say on a voice vote, the mayor declared the motion carried with one dissenting vote by Councilmember Hayner, and similarly on DB2 from those minutes with your consideration, I would like to go on the record as failing to turn my microphone on and being a lone dissenting voice.
Seconded by Councilmember Smith. Discussion. All in favor of that amendment?
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none. The amendment is approved.
Thank you for your consideration, everybody.
Always a pleasure. Further discussion of the minutes as amended. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. B1, pardon me, the minutes as amended are approved. B1, an ordinance to amend Chapter 8, Organization of Boards and Commissions, Section 1210, Title 1 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor to allow council to waive employment restriction. Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, second by Councilmember Lum. Discussion of B1. Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll be brief. I just want to be crystal clear that this ordinance amendment was proven to be necessary in consideration of all 62 applicants, simply because a small handful have worked for the city in the past as election inspectors. It's a very temporary part-time job through which people give their time in public service to make sure our elections are free and fair. And we wanted to make sure the whole depth of the applicant pool was, had a chance to serve, and election inspectors will have a chance to serve on this commission into the future. So just wanted to be crystal clear that it's focused with respect to individuals like that, and with the help of Councilmember Eaton and Councilmember Nelson, I believe's amendment at our last meeting, it'll be limited to individuals who have only received up to 7 paychecks in a given calendar or fiscal year. So very limited in its focus.
Further discussion? Councilmember Hayner.
I'd just like to say something very similar to what I said last time this was before us, in that I found the whole of this addition to the resolution unnecessary, and I like the way it stood before. Of course, that's not the question before us now, but I don't see why we had to go in there and make these, as the man spoke earlier, some kind of potential backdoor operation available to future bodies where they can decide that somebody can sit on there, somebody can't sit on there. I don't understand the enumeration of it, and I liked it the way it is, so I'm not going to be supporting this change.
Councilmember Ramlawi, then Ackerman.
Well, we brought this forth at the time because of all the timing procedural issues with bringing names, first readings, second readings, and I believe at the time that it was discussed, there were all 62 people eligible, so we wanted to make sure that we had the insurance in place if any of the 11 that are there now who have been named have been election workers or temporary employees. So it was because we wanted to make sure that we had all our ducks in order if there was somebody who was affected by that. Suggestions to say that this is an attempt to put somebody else on there, I would just, I'm pretty confident that's not the case. And I know that Councilmember Hayner asked a question, and it raised, I'm still, it's unsettled, I think, is whether we as council members are employees of the city. And we've been told that we're not employees of the city, which, I'm going to take a W-2 with me to do my taxes tomorrow, so I'm not sure if I agree with that. So that's going to be something that's going to continue to be debated, whether we are city employees or not. But it won't be decided because of this. It'll be, it's an interesting question that was brought up.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I would just remind folks again, 7 paychecks a year. We receive our paychecks every 2 weeks. That's about 26 in a given year. So council members are out of the question, and this isn't a backdoor to let in any former public servants besides those folks who may have served as election inspectors in between 1 to 4 elections a year.
Further discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Smith.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Rumlawi?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
No.
Councilmember Bannister?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Lum?
Yes.
Councilmember Graham?
Yes.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson?
No.
Motion carries.
DC 1, resolution to amend the Old West Side Residential Parking District West Mosley Street and appropriate general fund, unobligated fund balance in the amount of $1,000. Moved by Councilmember Smith, second by Councilmember Romulawi. Discussion, please, of DC 1. Councilmember Smith.
With my colleagues' indulgence, staff has asked that we postpone this one more meeting to give them a little bit more time to get all of the proper documentation in order before we go through with this. So with that, I'd propose that we postpone until our next meeting on, what is that, March 18th.
Seconded by Councilmember Romulawi. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is postponed. DC 2, resolution directing the city administrator to include funding in the fiscal year 20 city budget to conduct the Lower Town Area Mobility Study. Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, second by Councilmember Lum. Discussion of DC 2. As close observers of council will note, there was a long-standing and enduring conversation about the Lower Town Area Mobility Study, a study to enable the city to possess rights to and to use, in part, a model of the Lower Town area so that we can conduct, traffic analysis for, in connection with proposed developments and proposed transportation changes and improvements. The proposal a couple of days, at our prior meeting, lost on a 7-4 vote, necessitating an 8-vote requirement because it was involved a budget amendment. Frankly, this is because it was because council majority was in favor of that resolution, because council majority was in favor of that study, because for my part, I believe that it is incredibly important that we analyze the transportation network to the best of our ability, and that we utilize the best tools that we have or would have available as we plan going forward, that I bring this forward for council's consideration, asking the administrator to include it in the budget so that we can consider it in the ordinary course outside of a budget amendment context. Councilmember Griswold.
Yeah, I spoke opposed to this previously, and given the members in the audience right now, I'd like to say that we cannot continue our reliance on highly paid consultants if we're going to have funding for our sustainability initiatives. We need to change the way we do business. And in addition, right now, we have a Vision Zero consultant who's working on combining our non-motorized transportation plan and our transportation plan. Changes are going to be ongoing, and while we will own the model, there are many things that are going to change before this consulting contract is up 2 years from now. So this is disturbing. I also think that we need to collaborate more. Councilmember Nelson and I are now part of the SEMCOG walking and biking subcommittee, whatever the name of it is. There are resources there. And so I realize that this is just putting it in the budget right now, but we really need to be more frugal and collaborate and rely on our internal expertise or develop that internal expertise. Thank you.
Councilmember Hayner, then Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To follow up what Councilmember Griswold just said, I actually just sent to the clerk and the rest of the body I'm proposing a handful of amendments to the way the resolution is written, designed to clarify the causes of our traffic woes on the north side, the objectives of the study, and the cost of the study. So it has a few sentences added and a number struck from it. And I doubt that this is a friendly amendment because it substantially changes the costs that I'm willing to pay for a study like this. And it also adds a definition of what is from a First Ward resident of 35 years, one of the many problems with the traffic growth in our area. And that is the increased enrollment at the University of Michigan and the expansion of Michigan Medicine and university research facilities, especially in the Lower Town area, especially on the North Campus area. And so my amendment modifies the first whereas clause to add that line I just read. It says, whereas increased commuter traffic and development in the northern areas of the city and neighboring townships and increased enrollment at the University of Michigan and expansion of Michigan Medicine and university research facilities can reasonably be expected to add demand to the city's mobility network. Well, not only can it not be expected, it is happening, and we know that. And by the time this study's done, it's going to have happened even more with the construction of a 1,000-car parking structure, a 600-car parking deck on the lower town site, et cetera, et cetera. We also have many hundreds of bedrooms in the planning pipeline in various stages right now in our area. So I also question this, but I'm willing to put it in there. With the second change being to the resolve clause, says that the city council directs the city administrator to include a placeholder for potential funding in the amount of $150,000, not $650,000. We can't be spending $650,000 to have a consultant create a model that says you have too many cars. We know we have too many cars. I'd rather spend $650,000 from the general fund to make improvements that cut down on cars in our area. Now, I know it's a chicken and egg situation. We can't have a study, we can't act until we have a study, we can't. I'm just not going down that road anymore, so I'm offering these amendments. It's the only way that I'll support this tonight, and so I don't know what the next process is, but there they are.
So, Ms. Boji, have you received them at this point? I have sent it to you, and Councilmember Hayner has sent it to you and to council. Mr. Lazarus has received it.
I have received it.
Has everyone else received it?
Yeah.
I have it.
All right.
Yeah, there's only two more changes, and one just says that we can ask for anybody, not just the previous qualified firms, and we also want to define the objectives of the study.
Let's take these in order, perhaps.
Yes.
The first whereas, the addition of the words, so the second whereas clause would read, increased community traffic and development in the northern area of the city and neighboring townships, adding, and increased enrollment at the University of Michigan, and expansion of Michigan Medicine and university research facilities can reasonably be expected to add demand to the city's mobility network. Seconded by Councilmember Ackerman. Is that friendly to the body?
Yeah.
That's friendly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, addition to the, as I see it, is the first resolve clause, Councilmember.
That's correct.
Resolved that the councilmember directs the city administrator to include adding a placeholder for potential funding in the amount of $150,000 in the fiscal year 20 operations maintenance budget of the Major Street Fund to accomplish the objective of the study. Seconded by Councilmember Griswold. That is not friendly. So Councilmember Hayner, you have the floor with respect to that amendment, that is to say the first resolved clause amendment.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So it's just a placeholder, obviously, until we act on it in the budget, and I understand that, so I'm willing to let that part go. But the cost, I'm not. It's just outrageous. $650,000. Now, we could have 2 full-time professional traffic engineers on staff here for 2 years for that easily, and they could do other projects if they wanted to. And when you look at, say, the Roxbury Group has sent forward their traffic study for the Lower Town, the adjacent to Lower Town, the DTE site. It's 230 pages worth of study they did on their dime. And every developer is asked to provide a traffic study. And so I question what it is I understand that there's a complex computer model that's simulated, and we get the results of that model, we can play with the model, we can buy into the model and all that. But we have the majority, the bulk of this data before us, so I don't understand why we would commit to $650,000+ when the developers who are wanting and paying mightily to develop in this town and make their money in this town and put their products in our fine city are doing most of the work for us. So 150 might not be the right number, but 650 surely is not the right number for me. And I even had folks at the university say, why don't you hang it out there to our graduate engineering department and say, does anybody want to come forward and run this simulation for us for a lot less money and see what they can do? I'm just looking for innovative ways to get where we need to be with our mobility issues and also save the city some money. So that's where that's coming from.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will not be supporting this amendment, though I appreciate where it's coming from. A few thoughts. I think with respect to the fiscal philosophy as to whether or not you hire internal talent or you look to consultants to, boost expertise where you don't have it internally. I err on the side of hiring the expertise and talent you need when you need it, as opposed to paying for a full-time employee well into the future. A full-time employee that has the ability to do this kind of work is going to be a six-figure salary. And when you take into account the fact that in this economy, you have to expect that 50% of someone's salary is going to also go to benefits. We're talking about $150,000 salary a year, and this budget is consumed within 4 years. But we're not only paying for one consultant in this. It's a team of consultants who are going to do complex modeling that's going to help us plan for our future. And it's not just solving a question of whether or not we have too many cars, but what do we do about it? Because as the city's workforce has grown, as the University of Michigan has increased enrollment, as Michigan Medicine and research facilities have expanded, our workforce has expanded drastically, but the amount of housing that we supply within our city has not. And so we have an increased commuter population, and commuters do one thing: they commute into your city and then they commute out of it. And that increases the amount of cars we have, and we have to figure out, based on that and increased development on the north side of town, what we're going to do to address that problem. And modeling allows us to tackle those complex problems. It's as we invest millions of dollars over the course of the next 2 decades, how are we going to invest those dollars? Where are we going to be diverting traffic? Where are we going to be trying to get people out of their cars? How are we going to encourage walking, bicycling in the entire near north side? These are really complex issues. These are issues that require good planning, because if we don't have good planning, we're going to be throwing millions and millions and millions of dollars into asphalt without a plan to spend those dollars wisely. So I think with respect to 2 items, one, the philosophy of getting the expertise when you need it, not paying for the expertise in the form of a full-time employee who's going to be employed indefinitely, whether or not we have the need for their expertise. And to this, my second point is that this is $650,000 to spend tens of millions more appropriately, and I think that's a pretty good deal. So I'll be voting against this amendment and voting for the resolution in its full.
Councilmember Smith and Griswold, then perhaps we can vote on the amendment and move on. Perhaps. I'm at your disposal. Councilmember Smith.
Doing what I do in my day job as an urban planner who works for a big engineering firm, I know how much this stuff costs, and $150,000 doesn't pay for a traffic model for an area the size of the Lower Town and North Side area. I can tell you that a community that I work in had a much less challenging traffic assignment, looking at changing one-way streets on MDOT roads, and that traffic modeling costs over $500,000 and took 2.5 years to do. You know, the stuff takes a long time. It's really complicated. I understand where Councilmember Hayner wants to go with this, and I don't think anybody likes spending that kind of money to have somebody build a model for us, but, you know, it's not as though these are, 10 recent grads sitting in a basement with a PlayStation. You know, this is really complex stuff, and I want the liability of insurance of firms that do this for a living, and that's what their expertise is. And, I mean, I'd be much more comfortable just leaving the line blank than I would, putting in a number that is way too small to get anything out of this. I mean, $150,000 doesn't do anything. And so, none of those firms are going to continue to be interested in discussing anything with us. We're fooling ourselves if we think we can hire somebody and have them work on other things. For this, we have to hire multiple people to accomplish this and be able to do other things. So, being that I expect this to be the subject of pretty robust discussion come the budget time, I'd be interested in leaving this as it is and then adjusting it when we go through the budget.
Councilmember Griswold.
For clarification, we would leave the dollar amount blank at this time? Is that what you're proposing?
I'm not proposing anything. I said I would be more comfortable. I'd be more comfortable if there was no dollar figure in there, and they budgeted their best guess at what they think it should cost. I think that there's always a little bit of room for negotiation, but this is a pretty precise number.
Okay. And I just want to remind the council members that we have a consultant right now that we're paying approximately $400,000 to. So now we're going to be paying for one consultant to talk to another consultant. And I'll tell you, I've been in that position, and it's not very effective or efficient. The other thing is we have to collaborate and reach out to our partners. We no longer have the funds that maybe we used to have so that we could pay these high dollars for these consultants. And I can tell you, even though we may be spending millions of dollars over the next 2 decades, this information is not something that we truly need at this time because most of the development has been done.
Bannister and Eaton, and
Yes.
then Lum and Hayner.
Well, I just wanted to underline both what Councilmember Griswold and Councilmember Hayner said. As we're looking to fund mental health, climate action, pedestrian safety, and affordable housing, it just makes no sense to me to spend $650,000 on the Lower Town study. And just to elaborate on what Councilmember Hayner said, we just received the Broadway Park 230-page traffic study, which is right there at the same corner. And this 230 pages includes 40 tables, 3 figures, and 7 appendices. So I think that if staff has the time, that they should read these 230 pages and see where we can go from there. And one of the agenda questions that I asked came from a Ward 1 resident, which was, does Mr. Cooper or Mr. Hoopy or any of our staff have a wish list of possible solutions that might come out of the $650,000? And the staff response was, no, we don't have a wish list of possible solutions. So I think that question sort of falls flat. And so for that reason, I would support Councilmember Hayner's amendments. Thank you.
Councilmember Eaton.
Thank you. I want to thank Councilmember Hayner for bringing this forward. I agree that the $650,000 is just really extreme. And you have to look at it as part of an overall set of problems that we have. We probably need this kind of talent inside this building rather than hiring out each area of the city as a separate study. This isn't the only area that suffers significant congestion. Washtenaw is every bit as bad as this area. State and Main coming into town during rush hours, every area. And so the idea that we don't want to hire somebody with these qualifications to work for us on this particular study might make sense if this was the only area of congestion that we were suffering in town. But this is a problem in every artery that comes into town. And we're going to have to conduct this kind of modeling and this kind of study in each one of those areas one at a time. And if we have our own staff capable of doing this modeling, what they do for Lower Town, they can also do for the west side of town, the south side of town, hopefully for Washtenaw. And so I'm really hesitant to vote in favor of this resolution at all, because I believe that we need these skills on staff. But I would be much more likely to support this resolution if we, in fact, lowered the cost and agreed to rebid the contract. Thank you.
Councilmember Lum.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I understand where you're coming from, Councilmember Hayner, and, a lot of, very important comments have been made for us to consider as we are asked to, consider retaining expensive consultants. And you're right, Councilmember Eaton, there isn't a single artery in or out of town, major artery, that doesn't have a, traffic mobility congestion problem and challenge. And when you mentioned Washtenaw, we'll have another traffic study coming to us at some point, because the owner of Arborland, Brixmor, is the name of the company. They own Maple Village. They're doing traffic studies of the area, but they're traffic studies, and they're hundreds of pages long too. But their traffic studies are primarily traffic counts and studies of levels of service, but not modeling per se. And I see the value for having that kind of skill in-house, but right now we just don't. No one, and no doubt the study is expensive. No one's happy about spending $650,000 on another transportation study, but I have said all along that if we're going to do this study, it needs to be done right. And the second resolve clause of the resolution directs the city administrator to reopen negotiations with all the qualified firms that submitted bids initially. And I don't know if that'll result in significant savings or not, but it's certainly, I think, worth a try. The cover memo also states, at the confluence of Pontiac Trail, Broadway, Plymouth Road, Wall Street, Moore Street, Maiden Lane has the potential to become a mobility choke point. I think it's pretty safe to say that that potential is a pretty high probability. And if we don't do the study at all, we'll have no idea what the options are to address the issue, or any data to support specific actions, which is maybe why a wish list couldn't be generated at this point. I'm guessing. And I've also said throughout the discussions on this, and we've had several, if we don't do the study, no question we'll save money short term, but I think in the end that is penny wise, pound foolish. And so given that, I recognize their concerns with this Lower Town mobility study. But given that the reality that we're facing with the congestion in this area is already problematic, and the residential developments in the Nixon area to the north, plus the development at Broadway, Lower Town, are clearly going to exacerbate the problem. I think much like we did with Nixon Road, it's the right thing to do, and we need to allocate funds for doing this. And we have so many challenges for funding. This is money we're not going to be spending on something else. We can say that about you name the challenge, you name the need, you name the service, you name the program. And I will just say, Councilmember Nelson serves on the Board of Insurance with me. That's like a monthly reality check for me. It's not sexy stuff, but you see claims against the city. We're self-insured, so we pay these claims. They're costly for sewage backups in people's basements. And why is that happening? Because, we can't maintain the infrastructure the way we probably need to, clearly, or the infrastructure is deteriorating. And if the sewage doesn't go in someone's basement, it ultimately can end up in the Huron River. We've had a lot of those. So we have many environmental and other challenges, and just try to do the best job we can with prioritizing how your tax dollars are spent. Thanks.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'm no newbie to how much the city spends on consultants. I've been following it for 25 years. I know that $150,000 doesn't pay to get an envelope in the mail from these folks. And so I'm perfectly willing to strike that out and not support this at all. The critical part I wanted was the University of Michigan, because Many of us have spoken with folks at the university, at the regents, and engineering schools and other places, and friends and neighbors. And they say that they do want to be part of our community, that they do want to work with us as a city, and they do want to make contributions to things like this. They recognize the trouble that we're having here in the city, and they recognize that they're part of that. And when I hear that it's okay to spend $650,000 because we're going to be spending millions and millions of dollars in pavement, and I have to stop, having lived in this neighborhood for all these many years, and think, where are these new roads going that I'm hearing about? Are you going to turn neighborhood roads into major arterials? Is Planning Commission, like I saw on the meeting last week, are they going to waive the master plan where it says to connect these residential subdivisions that are being built all up along Pontiac Trail, where they're supposed to be connected off of Pontiac Trail with roads from subdivision to subdivision, and they waive that, even though it's in the master plan? So I have a lot of questions about just what is it that what is this $10, $20 million worth of road building we're going to be doing in the north side? Is it widening Pontiac Trail? What is it? People have legitimate concerns about this. And you know, I'm happy to withdraw everything below the resolve clauses and just get ahead to the vote, because I know we have a lot of things to talk about tonight. And I'm happy to have the Michigan a mention put in there for further discussion at the you know, at the budget cycle. You know, I'm not going to put a number on what these people charge, but I know that that's too much, and it's more than I'm willing to pay, and it's more than a lot of my residents are willing to pay too. So I don't, you know, I'm new to this process, of course, but I will happily withdraw all changes to the resolve clauses, and let's just get this thing moving, if that's amenable to everyone. I mean, nobody's going to support saying 150,000. I get it. I put that in there to encourage conversation around the topic.
I think procedurally, the amendment is no longer yours after it is proposed. It's the body's.
All right.
If the body acquiesces to the withdrawal, then I guess it's our collective decision. Is that all right with everyone?
What part's that?
I'm hearing no objection, so. So I'm hearing no objection, so that this amendment I'm going to treat as withdrawn with the body's acquiescence.
Thank you.
So further discussion of the main motion as amended by the first, in the second whereas clause. Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could I please be added as co-sponsor?
Further discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Smith.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Ramlawi?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
Nope.
Councilmember Bannister?
No.
Councilmember Griswold?
No.
Councilmember Lum?
Yes.
Councilmember Grand?
Yes.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
No.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Let us take a short break. A short break. DC 3, resolution regarding the City of Ann Arbor spending of proceeds from the 2017 Washtenaw County Mental Health and Public Safety Millage, moved by Councilmember Lum, seconded by Councilmember Ramalawi. Discussion, please, of DC 3. Councilmember Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And again, thanks everyone for coming out tonight to speak against this resolution. And one gentleman who spoke in favor of it, Mr. Nelson, who's been leading the charge on dedicating efforts and funding to address mental health concerns and issues, spoke earlier during public commentary and had to leave. Sorry. Oh, he's back. Thanks. It was nice to have one person's support here tonight. So I've listened to all of you, and again, we've gotten lots of emails, people who've written to me. I did get back to you. I'll got a lot of catching up on that to do. Again, the various nonprofits and their members wrote to us. And I've concluded I will be withdrawing this resolution tonight. This is not to say that I won't be digesting and utilizing the survey feedback and utilizing that to bring this resolution back on April 1st or something very much like it, or as a budget amendment in May. Again, I will be looking to that citizen feedback that we get from the quote-unquote statistically valid citizen survey that we're conducting, that council asks the staff to conduct. After speaking with a couple colleagues, including council members Eaton and Ramlawi, both of whom, for whom I have a great deal of respect for their judgment, I've concluded that offering this resolution tonight is premature. I agree it isn't appropriate to take further action until we receive and, again, digest the results of the community survey. Sorry about this, Mr. Nelson, on resident preferences for how to spend the county millage proceeds. I would like to comment, however, on a couple of points that have been raised over the weekend and previously on this matter. In thinking about this, we need to remember a couple of things about the 2017 county millage and the proceeds the city will be receiving. First, receiving a new revenue stream of this magnitude, which is about $20 million over 8 years' time, that the city is free to use as it chooses, is truly unprecedented. And I think it's worthy of a robust community conversation. Second, we need to remember that the ballot language for this mental health and public safety millage was silent. The ballot question was 227 words in length, and it was silent on how Ann Arbor was going to use these dollars. Yes, there was a council resolution of intent passed 2 months prior to the vote, but if we're honest, we'd all acknowledge the convoluted nature of the millage question resulted in zero clarity about voters' intent or voters' expectations. We also need to remember that this is taxpayers' money. And given all that, council decided to conduct a survey of resident preferences on how to spend the money that would help inform council on the matter, and that survey is now in process. Now some folks are suggesting that anything other than the 40-40-20 for the next 8 years is breaking a promise, a breach of trust, and is wholly inappropriate. Let's explore that a bit. City Council passed a resolution on a split vote, 7-4 vote, that commits to the precise spending of $20 million over 8 years. One city council can't and shouldn't bind future councils. I did ask questions about this in September and leading up to the council's vote through the summer, and we got responses from the city staff and city attorney's office confirming that resolutions are not binding and that it does not bind future councils. There are 2 reasons for that. 1, conditions and priorities can and often do change over time, and 2, establishing a budget is one of the key fundamental responsibilities of a council, and their ability to do that should not be unnecessarily limited. One council can't make and shouldn't make promises their successors are obligated to keep. And make no mistake, Council members knew that in September of 2017 when the resolution of intent was passed. Yet now, when a new council is simply trying to do its job and establish a budget that best serves the residents of Ann Arbor, anything other than 40-40-20 would somehow constitute an egregious offense. It is not clear how the current council will decide to allocate the $2.2 million in new funds for fiscal year 20. It may very well be 40-40-20. And this survey, some of the speakers described the resolution as a proposal to defund climate action. It's a proposal to first get the community input and then go from there. What is crystal clear is that this is council's decision to make. Council's decision not to make, not this council sitting at the table in September of 2017. This council has decided it would like to have input from residents. And I appreciate that most of my fellow council members supported obtaining this input. Council said we want statistically valid input to help inform this decision. To be honest, it truly escapes me how asking taxpayers how they'd like to have their money spent as input to a decision can possibly be inappropriate or wrong. Yet somehow that's where we seem to be with this. The survey is intended to engage a community more in the matter. Some say there's already been a community conversation around 40-40-20, but that's not accurate. There were 2 council votes in 2017, but no public hearings, no surveys, just a very confusing tax millage vote. That's the extent of the input we got from the public. I recognize that there are folks obviously passionate about funding for climate action, funding for affordable housing and pedestrian safety. That's completely understandable, and the advocacy advances the community conversation. In that same spirit, council wants to hear from a broad spectrum of the community before deciding on fiscal year 20 allocations, and that's what the survey will help provide. And I hope in this diverse community of ours, we're open to diversity of thought and getting input from all of our stakeholders, all of our taxpayers. As this unfolds, though, I just ask that the community honors a longstanding practice of Ann Arbor city government, a basic democratic principle for that matter, that those currently elected and in office are responsible for spending decisions, and that decisions we make for fiscal year 20 are made in good faith, based on our views of community priorities, and are not, quote, broken promises, end quote, should they be different than the 40-40-20 in the 2017 September resolution. Thank you very much for listening, and as I indicated at the outset, I am withdrawing DC 3 from the agenda tonight.
Councilor Griswold?
The way I see this is we really need to decouple our needs for our sustainability initiative. And we need to adequately fund the sustainability initiative and fund where we have measurable results. We need metrics. We can't just fund something because it sounds good. We have to make an impact on our sustainability goals. And if we decouple what we need for our sustainability initiative and we get it funded separate from this 40-40-20 debate, then I think we can take a lot of the emotion out of this discussion and we can focus on the solutions.
Let me suggest that we do this. I think there are people that wish to speak on this subject, perhaps, and it has been moved.
I withdrew it, and I'm the sponsor, so I will bring it back in April, as I said, April 1st after the, I mean, people are free to speak, but I did withdraw it.
Well, I understand.
Out of respect for where I know people are coming from.
No, fair enough, and I appreciate that it is withdrawn, and, for my part, as an opponent of it, I'm delighted to have it not up for a vote today. I guess just procedurally, I know that people want to speak, but the subject.
Even though it's withdrawn?
Well, I guess I'm noting that people wish to speak, and I guess we have a couple of options. Perhaps we can run the table, people say what they're going to say, and then we withdraw it.
I move to withdraw it. Or, okay, you would.
You see what I'm saying here, that people whose hands are raised, I know there are things I probably want to say about it. I think other folks would want to speak about it. Councilmember, you've had
I was just going to say, as I said at the outset, we're going to get the results March 25th from the community survey, and if, I will bring it back then, or likely have a budget amendment, but if people want to speak, I'll wait. Sounds like I should wait to withdraw?
I think that's...
Well, I would make the point of order that she's withdrawn it. There's nothing left to deliberate. There are council comment period at the end of the meeting if anybody wants to comment on something that's no longer on the agenda.
I'm content with that as the... I'm trying to do this out of respect for... Understood. It's that there has been speech on the matter, but not everyone has had the opportunity to speak on the matter. I guess we'll reserve, I guess I'll expect at public comment folks will circle back to the topic then, yes? Pardon me, council communications, which for folks in the audience comes, I hope and expect in fairly short order if you're still here, as I hope you are. All right, DC3 withdrawn. Thank you, council members. DC4, resolution requesting the City of Ann Arbor to develop and adopt a solar access ordinance, moved by Councilmember Eaton, seconded by Councilmember Hayner. Discussion, please, of DC4. Councilmember Eaton.
Thank you. The Energy Commission brings us forward, asking that we devote some resources to studying the issue of a solar easement. We want homeowners and property owners to install solar panels, and yet sometimes after installing those panels, residents don't get the full use of those if something is developed on the next door property. And so all we're trying to do is include enough of the actors in the discussion about solar easement so that we balance the interests of those who install solar panels, hoping to recoup their capital costs over a 15-year period, with those who might develop nearby. And so it is going to be a complex issue with a lot of interest to balance, and I think that this resolution recognizes the need to hear from those various interests. So I hope that you'll support moving forward on this so that we can have that discussion.
Councilmember Romlawi.
Just real quickly, I appreciate the Environmental Commission, the Energy Commission, that is. I'm bringing this forth. It's going to be a challenge to weigh out the competing interests for air rights and solar rights, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But I'd rather see us being proactive in trying to get ahead of these issues that are coming to us.
Further discussion, Councilmember Hayner.
I just add that I think this Energy Commission did a good job of looking at all the potential corners and shortfalls and everything that's involved in this, especially as it relates to planning. And we talk about building heights in the downtown area and so on. And in Ward 1, on the edge of Ward 1, there's a place right now where there's a nice house on North Ashley that's solarized, and there's a building going up next to it, and I have great concerns for the homeowners' solar exposure on that project. And so this can't come soon enough, so I appreciate everyone supporting this and the effort that's going to go into getting this resolution back before this body again, but it's well worth the effort. Solar is definitely, and disconnected from the grid is the way to go, and consider this more support of our sustainability initiatives.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's approved. DS1, resolution to approve street closings for the Ann Arbor Marathon running event Sunday, March 24, 2019. Moved by Councilmember Smith, seconded by Councilmember Griswold. Discussion, please, at DS1. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's approved. Do we have communications today from our city attorney?
Mayor, no, and there is no closed session tonight.
We have before us the clerk's report of communications, petitions, and referrals. May I have a motion, please, to approve the clerk's report? Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, second by Councilmember Lum. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The clerk's report is approved. We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Is there anyone who would like to speak at public comment? No need to raise your hand, just step on up.
My name is Richard Taylor. I live in the city. I would like to direct my remarks to the matter of the lawsuit against the city by Peters Building Company and Mr. Robert Weber concerning the property at 2857 Packard Road. From the outset, the development has been ill-conceived. It got as far as it did over the 2 years ago due to the strategy of shepherding it through a not very specific area plan, an approach which in and of itself was highly unusual. The previous city council should never have approved the change in zoning based on a vague area plan. After that, in each revision of the area plan and the site plan, the natural features on this land became progressively more compromised. Then, to cap off a sort of bait and switch maneuver, the real plan, the final site plan, reflects an outrageous, complete disregard for the natural features on this property, including the trees that were on the property before the city of Ann Arbor existed. The plan is like taking a nice set of neighborhoods and dumping a pile of broken puzzle pieces in the middle of it. So the city council in the past rejected the site plan in 2017. For the developer and the owner to then turn around and sue the city is ridiculously arrogant, in my opinion. This doesn't deserve any sort of compromise. To do that is like bending over backwards to be considerate or to accommodate someone who has just insulted your intelligence. To entertain the notion of even more densely packed housing on this property sets a very dangerous precedent, especially in that area of the city. This is not a matter of technically meeting the minimum standards for the destruction of the vast majority of 73 landmark trees on that property. This is a matter of honoring the principles of responsible development. I'm not against development, but I'm not against it per se, but we as a community, we can do better than this. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also have some materials I'd simply like to give to each of the members of council.
Please deliver to the clerk and she'll distribute.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment? No need to raise your hand, just grab the mic.
Hello, Council. I don't have remarks prepared because I didn't expect to have a chance to speak, but I would like to address you all and say that as a citizen of the city, I was pleased and excited to be able to vote for such a significant amount of funding to be allocated to this city's climate action and sustainability action. I can understand a desire to get further input from a representative sample of this community. And I also would like to say that it was, again, pleasing and surprising to be able to act as a citizen and vote on my ballot to make sure that my local money was being allocated for climate action, which is an important issue on every scale of society, and one that is felt more and more keenly by young members of this community who may or may not be reached by your survey. If your survey is targeting politically active members of this community, that's generally an older set, which, while well-intentioned in every regard, often I find fails to connect with younger people about the urgency of this issue. When you have people who are looking at spending the majority of their lives in a world under siege by climate change, your priorities tend to be a little bit different. So I look forward to this process going forward. I am glad that this resolution was withdrawn and will be perhaps considered more thoughtfully. And I hope that whatever happens, at least 40% of this money is allocated towards sustainability purposes, because I think we deserve at least that much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment? Seeing no one, public comment is closed. We have communications from council. I guess I'll roll first, speaking briefly about the notion of 40-40-20. When I with other colleagues proposed the 40-40-20 resolution back in June 2017, we did so knowing that climate action and affordable housing and pedestrian safety have long been in Ann Arbor somewhere between underfunded and unfunded. Knowing too that these were issues that have long been desires of the community. Areas where the community has demanded that we take action where we did not have, the free money to do so. And we did so knowing that this county millage rebate afforded an historic opportunity to meet those needs. We further did so knowing that we don't have much time. If we're going to build an Ann Arbor that is more affordable and safer, and we don't have much time to be a meaningful part of the global movement, God willing, to reduce climate change. The drafting of a pre-millage use resolution is common practice. We have such a we have such a resolution in connection with the parts maintenance millage. We have such a resolution in connection with the local streets millage. We respect these resolutions even though we do not vote for them here. We respect them because this body, that is to say, this institution of which we are but fleeting members, this institution promised the voters that it would act in a certain way, and the voters acted in reliance upon that. In advance of the millage, the 40-40-20 resolution passed council. Indeed, it passed it twice. It was the subject of many articles in the newspaper, some detailing substantial support, some detailing substantial critique. I myself communicated this resolution and the commitment that it reflected to thousands of Ann Arbor voters. Interest groups, too, engaged their lists and thousands of others. These communications, followed by the voters' passage of the millage, does not create a legal obligation, but in my view, it does create an obligation of honor. It creates an obligation of council as an institution, not as a set of individuals. It creates an obligation of council to follow through with that commitment. The funding designated by 40-40-20 will have a substantial benefit for our community. It will fund streetlights and crosswalk improvements. It'll provide direct subsidy and provide much needed capital for our affordable housing needs, and it will drive the incredible and innovative work of the Office of Sustainability. 40-40-20 will not save the world, but it is our duty to do our part. It will move us forward. It will ensure that Ann Arbor is on the map, that we are leading and taking real and sustained and funded action in these critical areas of affordability, perhaps our primary, local acute challenge, pedestrian safety, an area of important safety interest, obligated, important to everyone, and of course, doing our part with respect to global climate action. It won't solve these problems, but as President Obama is fond of saying, better is good. And this is right and proper for us to do. And as I've indicated here on numerous occasions, and I'll do so again here, this is a matter, the conformity and the following through with our 40-40-20 resolution is of foundational importance to me, and I'll do everything I can to ensure that we do. Further communications from council. Councilmember Ramwali, then Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. Appreciate the opportunity to speak on this issue as well about the 40-40-20. you know, it's just not a matter of, we're not defunding these issues. And there's been a lot of emails, we've been sent hundreds of emails in these last few days telling us that we're attempting to defund these issues if we were to support a resolution to break the chains of the resolution that was passed in 2017. Myself and others were not present in 2017, but yet we were given the responsibility of forming a budget and putting our priorities in line with our dollars. And as far as I can read and tell and feel the way our staff will go about its business, they're not going to do anything different unless we pass a different resolution. And it's unfortunate we did not come to a better compromise. I think Councilmember Lum was smart in pulling this back and coming back a second time. But we, back in December of 2017, one of my first meetings here, instructed staff to spend $20,000 to $30,000 to get us a survey. And with that survey, we were supposed to then make our decisions based on this year's budget. And during some conversations, we were told, well, it was not expressed in those latter conversations that the survey results will be incorporated in this year's budget. That was very disheartening to hear. So we are asking you to take control of our budget, not to defund climate change, not to defund affordable housing, or not to fund pedestrian safety. We are asking to be able to take control of our own budget, our own destiny, and our responsibilities as council members. I do agree with Councilmember Griswold that we do need to decouple the sustainability spending and not have it its own silo. It needs to be embedded in all our spending. But that's obviously for more discussion. The fact that this promise was voted on and approved twice is, frankly, it was the same body. They could have voted on it 15 times, 20 times. And the fact is, once was enough. So one vote or 2 votes or 15 votes, it was the same body. And this is a different body, and I don't want to put the future body in 4 years from now with obligations, because this would be enough for 2 full terms, not just 1 year, but 2 full terms. So we will continue to revisit this. This is not done. We will be changing this in some form or fashion by the time I'm done with council. And we're going to find ways to fund all those issues that our community feels strongly about. And by the emails we've gotten, by the people who come in and speak to us, by the people that came to the constituents hour and the caucus last night, we understand that these are real issues and that we will be funding. But we want to be given the latitude to control our own destiny. So I can go on and on, but I just want to make sure to let the public know this is not an attempt to defund anything. The Trumponian fear that's being spread is not based in fact.
Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. I want to thank Councilmember Lum for withdrawing this resolution because it was not something that I was comfortable supporting. I do believe that the resolution is relevant to our decision-making process, but we are in a remarkable situation, and that is where this issue, I think, has been framed, unfortunately. This county millage was structured in a way that was unprecedented. The idea that that local municipalities were receiving funds that were untethered as to purpose, but the county millage, the ballot language had clearly stated purposes. And no one yet has pointed out that 7 municipalities got this rebate of untethered funds, and Ann Arbor was the only community that passed this resolution of intent ahead of the public vote and long ahead of the budget process that would actually allocate the funds. And that's why we're in the situation we're in now. So this combination of the millage, the rebate, and the 2017 resolution has led to a lot of confusion. And I guess I would just want to point out that we are in this unusual situation, not because the current members of council are failing to follow through on a promise, but because of decisions that were made long before we got here. In the other 6 municipalities that received this rebate, the elected leaders in those municipalities recognized that the funds were entering local budgets untethered as to purpose, and the allocation decisions would have to happen in the context of regular budget process among the leaders who were in office during that process. I think that's the piece that's missing in this discussion. And so I find these conversations extremely awkward, and it's not my fault. I didn't sign on for this plan of making a promise that was going to happen 18 months later among potentially other people. It's not really fair to us. And so I appreciate everybody who has reached out to us to express your opinions. I actually have concerns about the survey, which I think we're going to talk about at a later date. But yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
So, you know, I think that much of the discussion that's happened over the weekend, I really appreciate, and I think the volume of people from across the spectrum that have contacted us with their support for ongoing dedicated funding to these 3 items shows how broadly the public supports this, that this was the driving force behind why they supported the millage. And I would suggest that if we want to decouple climate action funding from this millage rebate or to suggest that it's not being defunded, I think the only way to do that effectively is to come forward with a specific budget proposal that shows an ongoing stream of revenue to support these programs that is at least equal to what we had pledged to the voters. Now, you know, I will push back a little onto what I just heard and echo something that the mayor said is it is very common for us to pass use resolutions prior to millage issues going on the ballot. You know, if we decide to go on, back on this, I would think that it opens the door to go back and look at, hey, voters passed a Greenbelt millage back in 2004. I wasn't part of that council. I didn't decide how any of that money got spent. Maybe, you know, we can try and repurpose some of that. Like, I don't think that would be right. I think there would be a community outcry that I was being totally undemocratic. I understand that people don't like the way that that happened, but we have made a commitment, I believe, to our voters. And I think that undoing it in this manner with a survey is shameful. I think it's, and I think we've heard loud and clear that people feel that that's a bait and switch. And I think that that is a perfectly fair criticism of this resolution. And I think to bring it back on April 1st just extends this discussion until April 1st. And I would expect that we will continue to have these communications. I think you will continue to hear how important the dedicated ongoing funding to these programs is. If there is another way to figure out how we are going to fund these things on an ongoing basis instead of a one-off here and there, then let's hear it. Because we've been saying we're going to do this stuff for as long as I've lived here, and we haven't done it. And this is our first step at doing it. And damn it, let's do it.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Lum, for withdrawing this resolution. While I disagree with many of your reasons, I appreciate, and it does take leadership to put forward your ideas and bring them back when faced with criticism. So I appreciate that. I got the memo about wearing green today, and I wore them on my socks. I have dinosaur socks, and I was going to make a joke about the last great extinction, but we'll leave it for April 1st. I'm biased towards the 40-40-20 split. I co-sponsored the original resolution, not the second one, the first one that was voted on in July 2017. I think the reason that we put forward two resolutions at that time was, well, one, we had some important clerical items to work out, but second, because we wanted this to be communicated out to the community in as broad and as frequent of a way possible. And by expressing our intent to fund climate action, affordable housing, and pedestrian and cyclist safety, not once but twice, was a very good faith effort to inform the Ann Arbor voters of our intent to do just that. And yes, that vote did come 18 months before any of this funding would be released, but we make a lot of decisions about how we're going to spend money 18 months, sometimes even 5 years or 10 years before we spend our dollars. And that's good fiscal planning, that's good transparency, that's what we do as a government. I also have concerns about the citizen survey. I'm sorry? I also have concerns about the citizen survey. I think one of the best survey tools we have as a democracy is the ballot box. First, a ballot box when people approve to tax themselves on an issue, but also to elect representative bodies. And a representative body, in a 7-4 vote, voted twice to make this commitment. This is an existential need. Actually, all three of these items are an existential need. We have an existential need to be a leader in the state of Michigan when it comes to how we want to address one of the greatest human crises, perhaps probably the greatest human crisis that we've faced. We have a need to address a housing crisis that prices more and more people out of our community every single year. And we have a safety crisis. When we look at calls to the police, when we look at deaths and injuries in this community, it's not violent crime, although the last 6 weeks would perhaps say otherwise. But it's people being injured in the streets and crosswalks. And we need to fund solutions. I'll be proud to continue to support the 40-40-20 division. Like colleagues have said, these are underfunded areas, and they're underfunded areas. They will be underfunded areas moving forward if we don't commit to the funding. To the point about whether or not this is unfunding, we've made a commitment of almost $1 million a year to climate action. And to say we're not defunding it, I think is misleading. We have a committed revenue stream that is identified and is going to be promised towards a use, and people want to take that away. I think that is perhaps the definition of funding something, defunding something. And finally, the idea to make promises that we'll find a way to fund all of these initiatives is false, and that's unfair. Finding funding for these issues has been difficult. It's been the work of councils for decades. And it wasn't until there was a new revenue stream that we could identify dedicated funding towards these issues. To say, don't worry, we're going to find a funding mechanism is unfair. It is completely unfair. And it's one of those elected official promises that elected officials shouldn't make. What you should do is take an opportunity for funding and use it to its best and greatest opportunity. So I'm sure we'll have more to talk about on April 1st. Thank you to all who came out. Thank you to all those who will come out again on April 1st. And thank you to Councilmember Lum for withdrawing the resolution.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm obviously compelled to address this. Everybody's taken their opportunities here, and I was going to do it by reading a response to one of the many, many emails that I received. But before I get into that, my colleagues have given me a few things to talk about. I think there's a big effort underway to create this narrative that somehow this was not a vote for mental health and public safety, that it didn't say that on the ballot. And this sort of little backwards masking going on there. And that's fine, you can do what you want to do politically. But to suggest that that somehow it's dishonorable that I question the motives behind this spending, or even question the ratios that are put forward, is yeah, it's gone a little too far, and I mean, I appreciate Councilman Smith's, searching for a metaphor, but the Greenbelt's not the right metaphor, because that is a dedicated fund that goes into dedicated spending that was approved by the voters for a dedicated purpose. This is general fund money that we happen to set aside in a separate account for bookkeeping purposes. It's general fund money. And so when one of the many hundreds of people reached out to me, I responded and I said, as you can imagine, I've been almost overwhelmed with emails on this topic, and I'm not a fan of the 40-40-20 promise for a variety of reasons, none of which have to do with the intent of the spending. I fully support spending on climate action goals and affordable housing and public safety, but being bound to this 40-40-20 ratio for 8 years is a bad budget practice. Our needs change, and our investments in these areas may prove fruitful or fall short. To not be allowed to adjust and spend more or less as needed is inflexible and unnecessary. I don't see a lack of support on council for these causes. What I do see is a dangerous politicizing of the budget process that's not in the best interest of the residents. And as for the survey, I'm interested in what it says, but only as one of many guideposts for my budget decisions. The more interesting survey was the one conducted, an independent survey, showing majority of voters were not aware of these commitments, especially as there was no mention of them in the ballot language whatsoever. Be that as it may, we're going to have these general fund dollars, and to the best of my ability, they'll be directed towards actionable, measurable ways to support our climate action goals, our affordable housing needs, and more importantly, our associated to mental health supportive service needs and other public safety issues. And so I don't see a lack of will to support these critical issues in our community. I see a frantic effort to politicize the budget process, and I think that's unhealthy. I think it's unhealthy for this body, and it's unhealthy for the community. And so I urge my colleagues to let's set these things behind us. Let's move forward with this budget process and have an open and transparent conversation about what our needs are and the best way to fund those needs. It may be through dedicated ratios of spending, not in my opinion. It may be through looking to integrate these needs more closely with our staff's processes and our city processes, and we've done some of that already. But what we don't need to do is to continue this animosity about who said what and who made what promise and who's breaking a promise, because that's not getting us anywhere. It's not worth it. It's not what we need to do as a body, and it's not where we need to be as a community. We need to show leadership on this issue together. Thank you.
Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. I want to also thank Councilmember Lum for withdrawing this. I think it's clear that, we've been working well together on some things, and I have a great deal of respect for her. I just disagree when it comes to this issue, and I disagree with a lot that's been said at the table this evening. The 40-40-20 was a commitment that this council made. As it's been mentioned before by others at this table, that there are other policies that we follow that we did not decide upon as a council. We as a council, for example, will not go forward and fund the water treatment plant and then say, oops, oh, sorry that you started, we're not going to do that anymore. We as a council, there have been many policies that I didn't agree with, but I understood were constraints that I had to work within because it was council policy, and that's what we needed to do. And frankly, this idea that like, oh, well, I wasn't at that party, so I need to now be the one who's making the decision, and I'm upset that the council did this before. Well, I'm sorry, that's council policy. And if you've heard from the mayor, who's much nicer than I am, so I'm going to translate his words in less nice language, he will veto any attempt to overturn 40-40-20. And as one of my colleagues used to say, I don't count 8 votes at this table. That is a commitment that this council made. That is a commitment that I will make as long as I am here. And we can talk about all the nice language that we want, but the reality is there was not money to fund this before. We haven't been able to find it. This was a way to do it, and these were priorities that we heard time and time again, if it wasn't obvious from all the emails you got this week from this community. Pedestrian safety, affordable housing, sustainability and climate action. I'm liaison to the Housing Commission. The Housing Commission has been planning based on these budgets because that is good budgeting practice. When you know that you have money coming in when that was council policy. And there are people who are most vulnerable in this community who are depending on supportive services that will come from this money. So if we don't go forward, that is a mental health crisis in this community, and that is why I'm going to stand by this policy. So if that wasn't clear enough, and I'm not going to apologize for the tone because I am incredibly frustrated. There are other actions where we've said, oh, we support affordable housing. Really? Well, let's have that discussion when we bring Lockwood back. Because I have seen that this council doesn't support affordable housing when they have the opportunity to pass it. Oh, we support climate change. Well, why didn't we fund all of Dr. Stoltz's proposals when she brought them forward last time and we nickeled and dimed and put her through this process of having to defend every one of her decisions? Let's just act. If we believe in these policies, let's then bring the money forward. And if you want to find another source of funding, fine, bring it forward. But until then, 40-40-20 stands.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to all my colleagues for sharing your thoughts. I just want to clear the air on a couple of things. On the county mental health and public safety millage, so the County Board of Commissioners approved the ballot proposal on July 12th, 2017. By a vote of 5-4, it was approved. Prior to that, the City Council passed 2 resolutions about this. Passed a resolution of intent, was approved by Council 8-3 on July 3rd, 2017. Again, after that vote, the County Board of Commissioners approved the ballot proposal. So there were some changes made. So then Council revisited the resolution of intent and approved it, the 40-40-20 on September 18th, 2017. At the time, it was Resolution DC-3. Councilmember Nelson talked about how things like this should be part of the budget discussions. And for those of us who did not at this table vote for the 2 resolutions of intent, that's the time that we as council members had the chance to vote, unlike the community, on the 40-40-20 spending plan. So there were 3 of us who didn't vote for this. I was one of them on July 3rd, 2017, and 4 of us, I was one of the 4 on September 18th. And the arguments that we put forth, if you went back and watched the video, was that this should be part of the budget discussions. We failed in that steering logic just didn't, get the others to agree with us. The Board of Commissioners, after I want to address the word rebate is used, and I want the community to understand that if you're an Ann Arbor taxpayer, it is not a rebate. One of the late changes that the County Board of Commissioners made to the ballot proposal was to substitute population for taxable value. So they based the distribution on population. What that meant for Ann Arbor taxpayers is that we are going to be supporting the areas, non-Ann Arbor residents, out-county areas, by at least $200,000 a year plus, because again, it's based on population. So it's really not a rebate. We're not getting back, Ann Arbor taxpayers aren't getting back what they are spending on this millage and being taxed on this millage. Another change that the Board of Commissioners made, they changed, this is again on, after they voted, the millage was on the 12th, I take that back. This was a change they made on the 12th of July, that they changed it from a 10-year millage to an 8-year millage, and they changed the levy period from, it was to start in December 2017, they changed it to 2018. So it was a bit of a moving target. The repurposing millage dollars, can't do that. You got to go back to the voters. And so the references that were made to other millages, we've never done that for any other millage. Can't do it for the Greenbelt, can't do it for the streets, sidewalks, bridges millage, you name the millage. Every city millage if we repurpose it, and I've intimated that I'm thinking about this with the Greenbelt, take it back to the voters, but you have to take it back to the voters, which is obviously the right thing to do. You can't count this council, elected officials can't repurpose that money. And this millage proposal was 227 words in length, and it was, again, silent on no mention of climate change, climate action, affordable housing, and pedestrian safety. And that has been questioned, and I did ask questions about that, but the response I got back from city staff and our attorney's office was that we can't opine on county proposals. But the question I asked was, because the state law is very clear about this, state election law, and it states that, that every millage question, any question of, I'm reading from the state law, of authorizing a millage rate to be levied, ballot shall state all the following, a clear statement of the purpose for the millage. So these purposes were not enumerated in the millage. Lastly, I will just say, clearly the, I talked about this is an existential need, and I can assure you, so we hear appeals from people, so we actually get to meet the people who have, sewage in their basements. That's a pretty existential need for those folks. And again, obviously not, an exciting topic, but it's a real need that confronts our citizens. And, those are the kinds of things your tax dollars need to be spent on. We're self-insured, so we pay those claims sometimes. And Sparty tonight would have been, this looked like a, Sparty audience. The environmental groups are very well organized, and yeah, everybody donned green tonight. So, but Councilmember Ackerman told me that apparently in Germany, this started the green movement. Blue is the color. So, yeah, for this community, just wear blue. Thank you.
Further communication? As we have no closed session, we have a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councilmember Ramlawi, second by Councilmember Smith. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned.